Hey guys, tonight we are venturing into the stone-cold heart of medieval Europe, right through the gates of a towering fortress that everyone back then thought was the pinnacle of safety and power. You, however, are about to discover that this so-called stronghold is really just a giant, grim, granite-lined death trap. And yeah, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Seriously, don't fake it. This isn't a castle tour, it's an ordeal. Also, drop your city and the time in the comments. I'm always curious who's up at this weird hour and from where. Now, to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere in the late 1200s, and you're approaching your new home. It's not much, just a towering chunk of rough-hewn limestone perched atop a lonely hill, shadowing the village beneath it like a brooding war god. You're here to serve as a page, or maybe a guard, or maybe someone just unlucky enough to owe feudal service. You squint upward at the keep, and it squints back. Cold, narrow windows like glaring eyes in a weather-beaten skull. From a distance it might have seemed noble, strong, even romantic, but as you get closer the smell hits first. A noxious cocktail of old sweat, mouldy hay, and something disturbingly close to wet dog and roast pig, except no one's roasting pigs right now. You cross the threshold and instantly lose 10 degrees of body heat. Inside is dim, echoey, and wet in places that really shouldn't be. Welcome home. Your boots squelch a little on the stone floor. There's no flooring, no wood, no rugs, just raw rock with centuries of gunk rubbed into it. Moss clings to the inner walls like it's got squatters' rights. Rats skitter by in the shadows, and you try to convince yourself that they're the large, cute kind. They aren't. Right away you realise the only cosy part of this whole structure is the illusion. This castle was not made for comfort. It was made to keep people out, and kill them if they tried to come in, which incidentally includes you now that you're stuck inside its guts. You're assigned to a corner nook in a side room off the Great Hall, where your bed is a straw mat. Home to what will soon be an ecosystem of lice. You're expected to sleep in your clothes, which doesn't matter much because you only own one outfit. Layers? Optional, but shivering is mandatory. The thick stone walls suck the warmth out of everything. Your breath fogs even indoors. The other inhabitants eye you, assessing whether you're worth knowing or ignoring. You spot a couple of veteran guards lounging on barrels near the fire pit. Their boots steam dry, but their eyes hollowed by countless sleepless nights and the 1,000-yard stare of men who've seen boiling tar up close. You nod a greeting. They do not nod back. You're still exploring the castle when you nearly trip on a loose flagstone and accidentally discover a forgotten side stairwell leading downward. You think better of investigating alone, because this place has a reputation. Not for ghosts, though, give it time, but for claiming lives the way most buildings collect cobwebs. Broken necks from sudden falls, crushed bones from collapsing masonry, and of course the occasional disappearance. No one checks the dungeon unless something starts to smell. Later that day you meet the Castellan, the castle's manager more or less. He walks with a limp, which you suspect didn't come from a jousting tournament. His face is a map of old wounds and poor sleep. He informs you in a voice as cheerful as a funeral bell that there are rotating duties: firewood gathering, arrow fetching, turret watch, and every now and then corpse disposal. Don't worry, you'll learn as you go. One of your first jobs? Helping clean out a corner of the outer yard that's apparently attracting flies. You're told a dog died there, but you're pretty sure dogs don't wear leather boots. You help roll the corpse into a cart, trying not to breathe through your nose. As you tug the body, something clinks, a broken dagger still sheathed at the waist. Another servant mutters that the man had tripped on the stairs. You glance at the angle of the neck and think tripped must have meant helped along. Dinner is served in the main hall. Thin broth, stale brown bread, and a wedge of hard cheese that might also double as a weapon. You eat it anyway. Meat is rare, and no one talks while they eat, because chewing takes effort and noise attracts attention from the higher tables. The lord of the castle, whom you haven't met yet, sits on a slightly elevated platform near the hearth. His face is hidden behind a long beard and a heavy hood, but he doesn't seem interested in the people keeping him alive. That's fine. You don't particularly want him to notice you either. Later that night, your first sleep in the castle is a sensory experience. You hear everything: the creak of ancient timbers, the soft scurry of rats in the beams, the muted coughs of others trying not to be heard. There's a faint metallic tang in the air. Old blood, you think. Your straw mattress crackles as you shift. Something tiny bites your ankle. You try not to scream. One historical fact. Castles weren't just military bases. They were full-time homes with servants, families and livestock all shoved into tight quarters. That meant constant stress, low hygiene, and surprise violence from both outside and within. One fringe fact. In some castles the well was inside the keep, dug deep through solid rock so water couldn't be cut off during sieges. But sometimes that well also doubled as a convenient body dump when morale dipped. Just a little something to think about as you drink your evening water. As for debates, historians still argue whether castle life was truly miserable for everyone, or if it depended more on your rank. Some insist that the lord and his family lived relatively well, even luxuriously for the time. Others suggest that even high status didn't shield you from the disease, cold and a relentless paranoia. You curl up under your scratchy wool blanket and whisper to yourself that tomorrow will be better. It won't. But hope, like the rats, clings hard. At sunrise, the castle looks no more welcoming than it did the night before. In fact, it somehow feels more ominous now that you're seeing it in full pale daylight. The walls aren't gleaming bastions of justice like in the paintings. They're chipped, water-streaked and patched with mismatched repairs. Moss drips from the battlements like it's trying to escape. Birds nest in arrow slits. Somewhere nearby, a rooster tries to crow and fails with a sad, raspy cough. A fitting soundtrack to your new life. Today you're introduced to one of the castle's signature features, the portcullis. Basically, it's the main gate, a huge, heavy iron grid that slides down in an instant to seal off the entrance. And by seal, we mean crush. It's counterweighted to drop fast enough to turn a full-grown man into something approximating jam. You watch two squires demonstrate it on a straw dummy. The portcullis hits with a metallic shriek and a loud, wet crunch. One of the older guards nods solemnly and says, "Good drop." You suddenly start noticing how many stains there are on the threshold. The portcullis is controlled from above by a series of chains, gears and wooden winches, all hidden inside a little chamber over the main gate. You climb up there as part of your orientation, and it feels like standing in the belly of some enormous, cruel machine. Everything creaks, everything smells like burnt rope, and everything up here is meant to kill someone down there. The guard casually explains that during a siege, the gate might open just long enough to lure in enemies, and then slam shut behind them, trapping them like rats. You don't ask what happens after that, you can guess. You're told to never stand under the portcullis when it's being raised or lowered, not because you might get scolded, but because if it slips, you're toast. Instant, flatten you like a feudal pancake kind of toast. And the thing is, it has slipped before. The winch system is old, worn and weather-beaten. Rust never sleeps, and neither do castle engineers. Still, the real danger of the portcullis isn't just being under it, it's being near it when things go wrong. Say someone's attacking the castle, you're rushing in. Behind you, the enemy is closing fast, the gate is coming down, and you have seconds to spare. You trip, stumble, or hesitate for even a heartbeat, and that thing will come down, slicing clean through bone and armour, without so much as a polite warning. This gate doesn't care that you're on the right side. The gate is impartial. The gate is death. You find out there's a nickname for it among the veterans. The Widowmaker. Cheery. There's also a deeper lesson here. A castle isn't just a home or even a fortress. It's a trap. For the people trying to get in, and sometimes for the ones who already live inside. You've been here barely 2 days and you already know that this place will kill you for a misstep, a moment's distraction, or sheer bad luck. One afternoon, a young boy, maybe 12, gets his foot caught while running under the gate during training. The portcullis drops just behind him. His boot is sliced clean off, but somehow he makes it through, minus one shoe and about 2 years of his life expectancy from shock. The older squires laugh, but the gatekeeper just mutters, "Next time it's the whole leg." He says it with the flat certainty of someone who's seen that very thing more than once. That night, you walk past the portcullis chamber again and glance up at the mechanism. A single chain connects the release lever to the winch. One weak link, one frayed rope, and the whole thing could let go. You wonder how many lives have ended right here, unnoticed and unrecorded, just because someone looked up too late. Or didn't look up at all. On the brighter side, if you can call it that, the portcullis has also saved the castle more than once. There are stories of desperate sieges where enemies breached the outer gate, only to be caught in the narrow entry tunnel as the portcullis dropped behind them, trapped in what's basically a stone hallway with no cover and arrows raining from above through the ceiling holes. It's a death funnel, and you begin to realise this place isn't built like a fortress, it's built like a machine, one designed to funnel intruders into a meat grinder. And you're part of the mechanism now. Historically, castles began to include portcullises as early as the 10th century, but they really got popular in the High Middle Ages when siege warfare turned into a kind of grisly art form. The portcullis wasn't just a gate, it was a symbol. Cross it and you're either a trusted ally or already doomed. A lesser-known, quirky fact: some castles had multiple portcullises spaced just a few yards apart. That way, attackers could be trapped between two gates, one falling in front, the other slamming behind. Then defenders could take their time peppering the intruders from all angles. One famous castle had 3 in a row just to make sure nobody made it out alive. Overkill? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. And the scholarly debate here? Well, some historians argue the psychological impact of the portcullis was more important than its actual killing power. The sheer noise of it crashing down, the clank, the rattle, the final slam was enough to make enemies hesitate or even retreat. Others argue that it was exactly as lethal as advertised and remains one of the most efficient instant kill features in medieval architecture. As you return to your sad little corner that evening, you pause at the portcullis again. The air smells like damp iron. You place your hand gently on the stone beside the gate, and it's cold, impossibly cold, like the breath of something old and cruel. You imagine all the men and women who've died within a few feet of this spot, many of them just trying to get home or escape or serve. You wonder if they ever thought they'd die here. You wonder if you will. Spoiler alert, you probably will. You wake up to shouting, not the kind of shouting that comes from a drunken argument or someone dropping a bucket. It's the sharp, clipped tone of people who might actually die in the next 5 minutes. You scramble out of your straw mat, heart pounding, and race toward the gatehouse, where the commotion is focused. Something's happening at the front entrance, and your brain is already imagining the worst. Siege? Surprise attack? Some kind of horrifying goat-related catastrophe? You round the corner into the entry tunnel and are hit with a wave of smells that shouldn't be grouped together. Metal, smoke, sweat, and something a little too close to roast pork. And then you look up. That's when you see them, the murder holes. It's not a cute name, and no, it's not a heavy metal band, though honestly it should be. These are small, innocuous-looking square openings in the ceiling above the entry passage, part of what's called the barbican. In a peaceful moment, you'd probably miss them. They just look like minor architectural details in an otherwise unimpressive stone roof. But when you're under them and people above you are tossing down rocks, hot sand, or, if you're really lucky, boiling water, they become terrifyingly relevant. A group of trainees is being run through a drill, and the guards above are demonstrating just how effective murder holes can be. From your not-quite-safe angle, you watch as sacks of flour are hurled down through the holes to simulate rocks. The impact is deafening. One sack explodes on contact with the ground, coating everything in a fine mist of white powder. It looks almost comical, until you imagine the sack being filled with actual stone or something worse. The whole idea is to turn the entry passage into a blender. Once enemies are caught between the outer gate and the portcullis, they're funneled into a narrow corridor with no cover. From the ceiling, rocks. From the walls, arrows. From the floor, your own blood probably. The attackers are stuck, confused, packed shoulder to shoulder and trying not to panic. It's perfect, for the defenders anyway. And if you think the murder holes are the worst part, hold on. Some castles used them for pouring things down, not just rocks or sand, but scalding water, boiling oil, quicklime or tar. Quicklime, if you're unfamiliar, reacts horribly with moisture, including the water in your eyes. It blinds you, permanently. And if that's not medieval enough, imagine boiling tar seeping into your chainmail, cooking you from the inside out. No one's exactly volunteering to stand under one of these death drips. Funny thing though, the whole boiling oil image that Hollywood loves? That one's up for debate. Historians argue over how common oil actually was in castle defence. Oil was expensive, like ridiculously expensive. Most garrisons didn't keep the barrels of it lying around for just-in-case someone attacks purposes. Water, quicklime and sand were way more likely, and just as lethal when dropped from height. Still, the image of bubbling black oil pouring from above stuck around. Why? Probably because it sounds horrifying and sells the idea that castles were not just strongholds, but sadistic labyrinths of pain. There's a demonstration later that afternoon, and guess what? You're invited. Not as a spectator, of course, but as a runner. Your job is to sprint the length of the murder hole corridor without dying. Of course, they're not dropping real weapons today, just dyed flour sacks and wet sandbags to simulate impacts. Still, your nerves don't know the difference. You crouch by the gate as the signal is given, then you're off, feet pounding the damp stones, eyes squinted against the flurry of falling projectiles. The first sandbag misses by inches, the second clips your shoulder and sends you staggering. You don't even register the third until you're already on the ground, choking on flour dust and trying to decide if faking death would get you out of chores. Afterward, the guards hoot and cheer like it's all in good fun. One of them ruffles your hair and says, "Not bad, you only died twice." You're still coughing flour out of your lungs when you realise your elbow's bleeding. Not from the sandbag, but from the fall. You didn't even notice. The castle's already numbing you to pain. One factual note for tonight's mental archives. Murder holes, also called meurtrières, were first widely used in the 12th century, and became more elaborate over time. They weren't just holes, they were angled for maximum targeting. Some were even designed to let in archers who could fire straight down through the gaps at the poor souls trapped below. Here's your quirky fact. In one French castle, the murder holes weren't just functional, they were decorated. That's right. Carved stone flourishes and grotesque faces adorned the ceiling, so even if you were getting roasted alive, at least the architecture was interesting. That's medieval hospitality for you. And the scholarly debate? Some argue that murder holes were more psychological than practical. They weren't always used effectively and required coordination, planning and access to the right materials. A few historians suggest they were more about intimidation, because who wants to run under a roof labelled murder holes? Others counter that when used right, they were brutally efficient and helped defend castles against overwhelming odds. As evening falls, the corridor under the murder holes is scrubbed clean. Well, not really scrubbed, just sort of smeared around until the blood and sand fade into the grey stone like everything else. The castle doesn't try to hide its past, it just builds on top of it. You lean against a wall near the gatehouse, nursing your bruised ribs and wondering how long you'll last in this place. The irony isn't lost on you. The very structures designed to keep enemies out are also perfectly capable of killing the people they're supposedly protecting. It's like living inside a giant bear trap that occasionally hugs you. You catch the eye of another recruit. He limps when he walks, and when you ask why, he just shrugs. "Mr. Hole," he says. You nod like that's a normal sentence. Here it is. And as the wind picks up and whistles through the arrow slits high above, you imagine the next real attack. The sounds, the screaming, the murder holes in action. You don't sleep well that night. Morning comes again with a slap of cold air and the scent of burnt oats drifting up from the kitchens. You shuffle toward the outer courtyard, still half asleep, when you're told today's training will take place along the inner walls, specifically around the arrow loops. You rub your eyes, mildly confused. Arrow loops? You ask, thinking maybe it's a rope exercise or some weird medieval agility course. The grizzled guard leading you cracks a smile without any warmth and grunts. Nah, you're going to meet the castle snipers. Turns out arrow loops, also called arrow slits or loopholes, are narrow vertical slits cut into the stone walls, just wide enough to let archers inside the castle fire out while offering practically zero visibility or access for anyone attacking from the outside. In other words, the defenders get a shot, the attackers get a funeral. You follow the guard up a dizzying spiral staircase and arrive in a narrow walkway atop the curtain wall. It's cramped, chilly, and smells faintly of pigeon poop and fear. Along the inner side are rows of arrow loops, thin slashes in the stone about shoulder height. When you look through one, it offers a surprisingly wide view of the landscape outside, far more than you'd expect from such a tiny gap. Clever design that. You can see everything, but almost no one can see you. The castle's longbowmen are already there, casually inspecting their gear. Their bows are taller than some of the squires, strung taut and deadly. These guys have the lean, sunburnt look of people who spend more time outside than in, and their fingers are permanently stained from the bowstrings and arrow glue. One of them leans down and gives you an unnervingly friendly grin. "You ever see a man drop from 200 yards away?" he asks, not waiting for an answer. It's like watching a puppet get its strings cut. He pantomimes the collapse, complete with sound effects. You politely laugh, but your insides tighten a little. He hands you a practice bow, more a child's toy than a weapon, and motions for you to try a shot. You line up at the loop, knock the arrow, pull back, and immediately feel like your shoulder is going to dislocate. Longbows require insane strength, especially when you're weak from thin porridge and fear. Your shot doesn't even leave the wall. It arcs downward and harmlessly bounces off the base of the inner curtain. The archers roar with laughter, but not in a cruel way. It's more like you've officially been welcomed to the "you suck at this, but we like you anyway" club. A small win. Then the real demonstration begins. Targets are set up down in the outer yard. Straw dummies dressed like rival knights, with painted faces and little shields. The archers take their places, one per loop, and at the signal, they fire in rapid succession. The sound is bizarre, sharp twangs, the whistling flight of arrows, and soft thuds as the dummies jerk, collapse, and split. Some of the archers reposition slightly. That's when you learn that arrow loops aren't just vertical slits. Many are keyhole-shaped, wider at the bottom or sides. Allowing defenders to shift their angle of fire is not just about shooting straight, it's about tracking movement, adjusting range, and doing it all while protected by tons of stone. One historical fact here. By the 13th century, arrow loops had evolved dramatically. They started as simple vertical slits, but eventually became complex multi-angle openings, allowing for horizontal and vertical targeting. Some castles even had a double loops, one for arrows, one for crossbows. Engineering met bloodshed in the most elegant ways. But here's your fringe fact for the night. Some castles installed fake arrow loops in parts of the wall, just for show, meant to trick attackers into thinking there were archers behind them when there weren't. Psychological warfare, medieval edition. Look scary, stay scary, as the Castellan would say. There's a moment during the demonstration when one archer pauses. He squints through his loop at the forest line beyond the village. "See that shimmer?" he mutters. You look too. It's hard to tell what he means at first. Maybe just heat rising from the earth. But then you realise, that shimmer? It's armour. Several glints moving. Riders, maybe some scouts, maybe something worse. The tension spikes instantly. The archers go quiet. One of them quietly strings a fresh arrow, and the air tightens like a pulled bowstring. A runner is sent down to the hall to alert the garrison. You're told to stay up here, watch the loops, count the glints, report movement. Your hands tremble slightly as you kneel by one of the slits, peering out, trying not to blink too often, because if you miss something, someone dies. Nothing happens that night. The glints disappear. Maybe it was a hunting party, maybe it wasn't. No one relaxes. One of the older archers, bald with a scar like a snake down his cheek, lights a small pipe and murmurs, "Loopholes save lives, sure, but they also mess with your head. You start seeing enemies in every tree." And that's the real problem with arrow loops. You don't see people, you see shadows, some movement, suggestions. Your world becomes framed by a slit of stone, and the longer you stay behind it, the more the outside turns into something alien and hostile. You're always braced for attack, always half ready to fire, even when there's nothing there. There's some debate among scholars about how effective arrow loops were in large-scale battles. Some argue that while useful, they limited field of view and made coordination difficult. Others insist that well-trained archers using these slits could decimate attacking forces long before they reached the walls. It likely depended on the castle, the placement, and of course, the weather. Try loosing arrows in a gale, and see how accurate you are. By dusk, your back aches from crouching and your fingers are sore from gripping a bow that's more useful as a walking stick. You descend from the walls with the other recruits, all of you moving stiffly, blinking at the open courtyard like people leaving a very intense movie. You're quiet. Everyone is. Because once you've stared through a murder slot all day, everything outside it feels exposed. You eat dinner in silence. The roasted onion soup tastes like dishwater, and the bread is so hard you consider using it to practice parrying. But you chew, you swallow, and you pretend to taste something. That night, as you lie on your scratchy mattress, the image of those moving glints lingers behind your eyelids. You wonder if the riders will return, if the archers will be ready, if you'll be the one standing behind that loop when it all begins. The walls creak, the wind howls, and from somewhere deep in the stone you hear the soft clatter of rats. Sleep comes eventually, but only after your body gives up on fear. You wake up to the distinct sound of someone vomiting into a bucket. It's not even dawn. The castle is still cloaked in that pre-sunrise gloom, the kind where the shadows feel too thick, and the stone walls seem to lean just a little closer than they should. You peel yourself off your straw mattress, joints creaking like a rusty hinge, and try not to gag from the mingled stench of bile, damp wool, and what might be mould, or possibly cheese. Who knows anymore? You're told that today's lesson is about defensive manoeuvring. Sounds fun? Then they clarify. Spiral staircases. Less fun. You've probably seen them in every medieval movie ever. The narrow winding stairs curling up through towers like coiled snakes. They look elegant, charming even, if you ignore how cramped they are, or the fact that they reek of old sweat, burnt torch oil and despair. But you're about to learn that these spirals are not designed for comfort or convenience. They're engineered specifically to screw over anyone trying to fight their way up. The stairs are clockwise. Always. As you climb, the inside wall is to your left and the outer curve, wider exposed, is to your right. This matters because almost everyone in medieval Europe is right-handed. So if you're attacking up the stairs, your sword hand is jammed against the central column, forced into awkward little slashes with no room to swing properly. Meanwhile, the defender coming down the stairs has all the space in the world to bring their blade down onto your helmet. Over and over. With excellent wrist movement. Yay, physics. You start the climb, trailing behind a group of squires and another recruit who already looks like he regrets being born. The tower stairs are brutally narrow, no more than 3 feet across. Your shoulders graze the stone, your feet echo with every step, and your torch casts weird dancing shadows that make it look like there's always something just ahead of you, or behind. Halfway up, your instructor halts the group and turns, grinning like this is the best part of his week. He pulls out a blunted practice sword and tells the poor soul behind him to try to fight him up the stairs. The recruit raises his own dull blade and predictably fails. There is just no room. His swings are stifled, the central post blocks half his movement, and every time he tries to advance, he stumbles. The instructor doesn't even swing back, just lets gravity and angles do the work. The poor recruit ends up crumpled on the steps, winded and embarrassed. Defenders win stair fights, the instructor says. Every time, unless they trip. You're called up next. You hesitate, but then you climb, sword raised, heart pounding, muscles already sore from yesterday's loop drills. The instructor meets your first swing with a light deflection and steps down toward you, pressing his advantage. You try to retreat, but there's someone right behind you. You duck instinctively and crouch low, hoping to slide under his guard. Clever, except you hit your head on the wall. He wins, obviously. You're panting by the time the drill ends, your arms shaking from the effort of lifting a heavy blade in such tight quarters. The air inside the stairwell is stale and close, thick with body heat and soot. As you finally make it to the top of the tower, you emerge gasping into daylight, blinking like a mole. The view's stunning. You can see the river winding past the edge of the village, the treetops swaying gently in the breeze, and right beneath you, the winding death coil of the staircase you just suffered through. Here's a historical truth. Spiral staircases were a deliberate architectural trap. They were part of what made castles so infuriatingly difficult to storm. Some even had uneven steps on purpose, tall and short, alternating to trip up anyone moving too fast. In the heat of battle, when blood's in your eyes and armour's weighing you down, one bad step could send you tumbling to your death. Downward, head first. Your quirky fact of the day. A few castles actually built counterclockwise staircases. Why? Because the lord was left-handed. Seriously. It wasn't common, but in rare cases, an entire tower would be flipped to favour a lefty. You can imagine the confusion that caused when attackers stormed in expecting the usual spiral. Surprise! You're in his house now. Now for the scholarly debate. There's ongoing argument over just how impactful spiral staircases were in actual warfare. Some researchers claim they're more symbolic than practical. Sure, the design favours defenders, but in the chaos of a real battle, factors like fatigue, numbers and panic play a bigger role. Others point to documented sieges where towers held for hours or even days because a handful of defenders used the stairwell advantage ruthlessly. Later, after lunch, more turnip stew, yay, you're sent to help a carpenter repair a few broken stair treads. Turns out the stairs degrade fast. All those boots, all that weight. And when wood is used instead of stone, it rots from below where the damp air collects. The carpenter grunts as he works, muttering, "It's not the fight that kills you, it's the fall, or the fungus." And sure enough, as you kneel to help secure a plank, you spot something dark and spongy growing beneath the stairs. Mould. maybe even the start of dry rot. You suddenly realise just how fragile this whole structure really is. One weak step, one missed nail, and the whole spiral becomes a chute to your grave. Later that night, you're told a story by one of the older guards. He describes a siege from years back, when raiders breached the tower base and charged the stairs. The defenders poured oil down the steps, not hot oil, just slick enough to turn the whole thing into a deadly slide. The first dozen attackers slipped, fell, and knocked over the ones behind them like armoured dominoes. The defenders didn't even have to draw swords. They just waited at the top with pikes and watched the chaos unravel. That image haunts you as you return to your sleeping corner. The idea that something as simple as architecture could be that lethal, that clever, that cruel. As you drift off to sleep, your muscles sore and your knees aching from too many spirals, you find yourself imagining what it would feel like to charge up those stairs for real. Arrows flying, fire flickering, blood on the stone beneath your boots. You think about slipping, about the person behind you not stopping in time, about the sword waiting at the top. And you know now, deep in your bones, that the castle isn't just waiting for invaders. It's watching everyone inside, waiting for someone to trip, to slide, to fall just the wrong way. And it doesn't care who you are when it happens. It's sometime before dawn when a loud clang jerks you awake. You sit up too fast, smacking your head on the low wooden beam over your bedroll and letting out a whisper-cursed groan. Outside your little chamber, boots slap stone, voices shout, and somewhere in the distance a sheep bleats, either in fear or deep existential disapproval. Either way, you know the routine now. Chaos at this hour means one thing: drills. You barely get your tunic on before a senior guard shoves a bucket into your hands and points upward toward the wall walk. "Time to learn what's not real," he says cryptically. You're halfway up the stairs, bucket banging against your thigh, when you realise what today's lesson is. Boiling oil, or rather the big myth of boiling oil. It's one of the most cinematic images of medieval defence. Attackers swarming the gates, ladders scraping up the walls, and then splash! A vat of boiling black oil comes raining down, turning enemies into deep-fried knights. Glorious, dramatic, and, well, kind of fake. You're brought to the top of the gatehouse where several buckets and wooden cauldrons are lined up. One is filled with water, another with some thick yellowish grease. The third just has sand. Your instructor picks up a torch and gives a speech that might be rehearsed or maybe just delivered so often he could do it in his sleep. You've all heard the stories. Boiling oil poured from the battlements, enemies screaming, skins sleeving off like roasted onions. Good for theatre, bad for logistics. He points to the vat of grease. This stuff is expensive, you don't waste it. And heating oil over open flame, up here, windy towers, exposed fire, wooden supports. Real smart, that. You feel a little disappointed. You were kind of hoping to see someone pour hot doom from the sky. But then the instructor picks up the bucket of sand, lets it trickle slowly from the lip and says, "This'll blind you faster." Gets under the helmet, into the eyes, and no risk of the tower catching fire. You get the job of hauling buckets from the storerooms to the wall walk. It's miserable work. Each bucket sloshes at every step, and the wooden stairs suck the energy from your legs like they're personally offended by your existence. When you arrive back at the battlement for your third run, the instructor nods toward a practice dummy set against the outer wall. "Throw it." You hesitate. The bucket's filled with what feels like warm porridge, some sort of thick paste meant to simulate boiling tar. You don't ask what's actually in it. Probably kitchen scraps and despair. You step up, aim, and dump the contents over the side. The glop slaps onto the dummy with a wet splat and clings to its straw limbs in steaming gobs. The smell is awful. Onions, grease, and something faintly metallic. The instructor nods. "Imagine it's not straw," he says. "Imagine that's a man trying to gut your lord and burn your food stores. Now tell me you miss the oil." The truth is, castles did use scalding substances in sieges, but oil wasn't nearly as common as everyone thinks. Water, sand, lime, tar, and even hot urine were far more available and far less risky to handle. Heating oil to high temperatures took time, fuel, and a fire system that didn't risk the entire defence post going up in flames. Besides, tar was cheaper and nastier. Your fringe fact of the day: some castles dumped dead animals or human waste on attackers, not even as a primary weapon, just to demoralise them, choke up siege ladders, and spread disease. One castle reportedly tossed beehives over the wall. Actual weaponised bees. Now that's medieval innovation. The most terrifying part, though, is realising how much of castle defence was about the long game. You're not fighting a battle that lasts an hour. You're fighting a siege that lasts weeks, maybe months, and anything you throw, boiling, blinding or otherwise, has to last longer than their patience. Back at the gatehouse, a few squires are arguing over whether a single vat of boiling water could really stop a charge. One insists that it's more symbolic than lethal. It scares people, that's the point, he says. Another counters that once it hits chainmail, the heat gets trapped and the wearer cooks inside. You don't speak up, but both ideas seem plausible, and that's kind of the point. Fear does most of the work. This leads us right into today's scholarly debate. Did boiling oil ever actually see widespread use? Some argue yes, citing occasional records of flammable substances being used in sieges, but most historians agree it was rare, if used at all. Logistics, cost and danger all worked against it. The idea that defenders just kept cauldrons of oil bubbling on every battlement is likely more fantasy than fact. Even so, the idea of boiling oil stuck. It lives in stories, murals, movies and nightmares. That image, glowing liquid death raining from above, gets attackers hesitating. And in a siege, hesitation can kill you faster than an arrow. By late afternoon your arms ache from hauling, and your nose is forever ruined by the tar-simulating stew you spilled down your tunic. You're ordered to scrub it out using sand and vinegar, which just replaces one horrible smell with another. You think about the fact that in a real siege, you wouldn't have time to clean your clothes. You'd be lucky to stay upright. As the sun sets, you're assigned to the night watch along the South Tower, the same battlement where you practiced your boiling not oil routine. You sit behind the parapet, staring out into the fading light and wonder what it would feel like to see a real army massing out there. What it would take to lift a cauldron with shaking arms and dump it. Knowing that what you pour might melt skin or maim someone forever. You shiver, partly from the chill, partly from the thought. The stars come out one by one, indifferent to your aching muscles and the grit beneath your fingernails. Somewhere below, someone sings a rough lullaby to themselves, and it drifts up to you like smoke. Peaceful, almost. But you know better now, because castles lie. They tell you they're strong, impenetrable, noble, but in truth they're just elaborate traps. And you're not above them. You're in them, carrying buckets, pouring death, pretending you're safe. And all the while the walls keep watching. You don't get a restful sleep, not that you expect it anymore. The straw in your bedding has compacted into something resembling rope, and every time you shift, it makes a sound like someone crinkling parchment next to your ear. You've stopped dreaming too. Or if you are dreaming, your mind is considerate enough to make it feel like more castle training. So you wake up and don't know whether to be disappointed or just grateful it's over. Today you're told to report to the Outer Bailey. Something about water duty, which sounds like a break from death drills. It isn't. You're headed for the moat. At first glance, the moat doesn't look so bad. The water is greenish, sure, and smells vaguely of fish and something more sour. But it circles the castle like a necklace of swampy security. You imagine enemies charging the walls only to tumble in and flail about while archers rain down arrows. That's the fantasy, right? Then you're handed a rake and told to clean out the thick parts. That's when the truth oozes in. The moat isn't just water. It's a disgusting soup of rain runoff, waste overflow, and anything unlucky enough to drown recently. It doesn't move much, stagnant and thick in places like cold stew. There's a film on top that gleams in oily, iridescent colours. A floating pig skull drifts lazily past. Something splashes deep under the surface and you're told not to ask what it is. You keep raking. You're up to your knees on the bank, tugging at a vine-choked patch of sludge when your boot sinks deep into the mud. You nearly lose it trying to pull free. The edge of the moat is lined with rocks, but they're slick and loose, shifting underfoot like they're eager to help you fall in. One of the older servants laughs and says, "Don't worry, if you fall in, you only get sick sometimes." He coughs in a way that doesn't inspire confidence. Here's the truth no one wants to think about. Moats weren't picturesque bodies of water. They were disease pits. Gutters for everything the castle didn't want inside. Dead animals, discarded food, chamber pot waste, and whatever else got thrown out the postern gate. They weren't cleaned often because who in their right mind wanted to volunteer for that? And in wartime things got worse, much worse. The historical fact, not all moats were filled with water. Dry moats, basically deep trenches, were sometimes more effective. They didn't require upkeep and couldn't be swum across. They still trapped siege towers and enemy troops, and defenders could fill them with spikes, caltrops, or anything sharp and mean. But if you did have a water moat, it wasn't there to be pretty. It was part deterrent, part disease delivery system, and occasionally a surprise coffin for the unwary. Your quirky fact of the day: some castles reportedly bred eels or fish in their moats, not to feed the garrison, but to keep the water cleaner. Not clean, just less vile. It turns out a few hungry bottom feeders can help break down whatever floats their way. Bones, rotten meat, or the occasional misplaced chicken. Later that day, you're asked to assist a mason with inspecting the outer wall near the moat. From that vantage point, you really start to see how the moat plays into everything. It's a barrier, sure, but it's also a psychological weapon. It slows attackers down, makes them hesitate, forces them to cross on rickety planks or boats while under fire from above, and it smells so bad no one wants to be near it for long. The castle has a narrow wooden bridge that crosses the moat, only lowered when visitors arrive or when villagers bring their taxes and grain and livestock. During sieges, the bridge is raised and the gate sealed. Anyone stuck outside has two choices: leave or try to swim through the moat. That second option? Not great. There's a story one of the guards shares over a late meal: boiled root vegetables and something that might have once been mutton. He says that during a siege long ago, 2 enemy scouts tried to sneak across the moat at night. Thought they could swim under the bridge. No armour, just knives. One made it halfway across before the water got thick and pulled him under. The second shot through the throat before he even hit the far bank. His body floated for days, tangled in algae. Eventually someone poked him with a long pole and pushed him back out. You lose your appetite halfway through the meal. There's a debate among scholars about how effective moats really were. Some argue they were mostly symbolic, a way to showcase a castle's strength more than serve as a true obstacle. After all, determined attackers could build bridges, fill trenches, or even divert water. But others point to moats being a time-wasting nightmare for besiegers, forcing them to deal with drowning hazards, slow progress, and disease. Even a shallow, filthy moat could halt momentum long enough for defenders to regroup or reinforce. Near sunset, you get assigned to check the buckets used for fire control. That means walking along the narrow paths that skirt the edge of the moat, hauling sloshing water, and praying your boots don't slip. You nearly go over once. Your heart lurches into your throat. One foot dips just enough to feel the squish of wet moss on stone. The smell hits you full in the face and sweet, sharp and stomach-turning. You recover barely and laugh to yourself in that strained way people do, after narrowly avoiding death by sewage. As you head back to the keep, you realise something that makes your stomach sink in a different way. If a siege ever does come, you'll be one of the people expected to cross the moat in reverse. Maybe under cover of darkness, carrying a message or a warning. Maybe with a rope, maybe with nothing. The thought of wading chest deep through that toxic soup while arrows whistle overhead makes your skin crawl. And that's without someone firing from the murder holes. You return to your corner at dusk, tired and coated in grime that will never fully come out of your clothes. You don't bother washing. There's barely enough water for drinking, and besides, you've seen what the runoff from the moat looks like. You're better off filthy. You fall asleep with the memory of the moat sloshing behind your eyes. Not just the look of it, but the weight. The way it drags at your boots, the way it smells, the way it waits, always at the edge of things, ready to swallow the careless or the unlucky. You know now that the moat isn't just around the castle, it is the castle. You wake to the sharp clang of a bell echoing off stone. And this time it's not a drill. People are moving fast. Shouting comes from the main hall. Armour clinks. Someone drops a helmet with a crash and curses loud enough to make a priest flinch. You stumble to your feet, still half in a dream, and rush toward the gatehouse, just in time to catch the orders being barked. Drawbridge up. Double lock the portcullis. Now! You follow the others to the main gate. There, looming like a hungry jaw, is the drawbridge. In peacetime it lies flat across the moat, forming a neat wooden path with thick iron chains trailing up into the gatehouse above. In wartime, it's a trap waiting to spring, and tonight it's moving. You watch as the chains tighten with a groan that vibrates through the stone. Slowly the drawbridge begins to rise, creaking upward like some old beast waking from sleep. Beneath it the moat ripples, dark and thick, reflecting the torchlight like an oil slick. You feel it in your chest, the weight, the inevitability of it. The outside world is being shut out, and you're trapped inside the mouth. This is your first real look at how serious the drawbridge mechanism is. You'd heard about it before. "Just a gate on a hinge," someone said casually during a meal. They were lying. This thing is massive and deadly. As the drawbridge locks into its vertical position, it becomes a shield. Thick timbers reinforced with iron bands now standing tall and firm against any battering from the other side. You can imagine someone swinging a log at it for hours and getting nowhere. But that's not what really worries you. What does is what happens if you're under it when it comes down. Your instructor notices your gaze and smirks. "Hope you're never late on the return run," he says. "That thing doesn't care what side you're on. Gravity's got no loyalty." And then he tells the story, every castle has one, about the guard who didn't move fast enough. Maybe he slipped, maybe he tripped, maybe he was trying to help someone. Doesn't matter. The drawbridge came down on him like a god slamming a door. Crushed from the waist down. Didn't die right away. It took hours. No one could move the bridge again without risking the whole gate's stability, so they just waited. Eventually, he stopped screaming. You glance at the chains again, suddenly aware of how worn they look. They creak when they shift, dust puffing from the joints, like the castle itself is exhaling. There's grease on the gears, but not much, and rust creeps along one bolt like a slow infection. You wonder what happens when they fail. One of the younger squires leans in and asks if it's true that castles could drop the drawbridge as a weapon. "Like, on people," he whispers. The sergeant nearby snorts. "Only if they're lucky enough to be standing underneath. Seen it break bones clean." You file that away. Useful in theory, terrifying in practice. So let's talk historical facts for a second. Drawbridges weren't just simple doors. They were carefully engineered counterweight systems designed to be fast, heavy and final. A good castle could raise the drawbridge in under a minute, even under pressure. That meant if attackers were charging the gate, you had just enough time to let your friends in and leave the rest outside to die. But here's your quirky tidbit. Some castles didn't use chains at all. Instead, they had massive wooden levers, sometimes powered by cranks or even treadwheel winches that men walked inside like human hamsters. If your job was to turn that wheel all day, you either developed thighs like tree trunks or just quietly died of boredom. Tonight's drawbridge drama is caused by scouts reporting movement in the woods near the village. Again, stiff score. Still no proof of a siege, but the captain isn't taking chances. The bridge will stay up tonight. That means no trade, no deliveries, no travellers coming in or out. The world outside could be on fire and you wouldn't know. Inside, business as usual. Except now the air feels tighter. Here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Some historians argue that drawbridges were only occasionally raised, mostly in full sieges. That the whole drawbridge always up at night thing is more legend than standard protocol. Others point to records from paranoid lords who insisted the bridge go up every sunset like clockwork. Defensive strategy or sleep aid? Depends who you ask. After the gate is sealed, you're stationed on watch. The silence that follows is worse than any noise. You sit on the outer wall, peering through a slit in the wood planks toward the darkened road. You can't see anything, but you can hear something. A distant metallic rattle. Maybe a horse, maybe the wind, or maybe someone trying to test the edge of the moat for footing. Time drips by like molasses. You start to notice how cold the air gets when you're this high up. Your breath fogs against the wood. You hold your spear tighter, not because it's useful, but because it gives your hands something to do. Hours later, someone rings the all-clear bell. Whatever the scouts saw, it didn't get closer. Not yet. You breathe a little easier, but the drawbridge stays up, just in case. As you walk back to the barracks, you pass under the now vertical bridge. You stare up at it, towering like a wall. The underside is scarred, deep grooves from years of battering, weather. And maybe worse, there are bloodstains too, old ones soaked into the wood. No one bothers cleaning them anymore. The castle doesn't pretend it's innocent. You finally collapse onto your bedding and stare at the ceiling beam above your head. The thought creeps in uninvited. If there's an attack tomorrow, and the bridge needs dropping in a hurry, what if the chain sticks? What if it snaps? What if the gate fails while you're trying to pull it down? You close your eyes and picture it. The drawbridge slamming shut like a butcher's cleaver, and you're right underneath. Some people fear swords, others fear arrows. But you fear doors now. There is no bugle call or dramatic shouting this time. Just a soft knock at your door and a whisper from a tired voice. Armour on. We're camping outside the walls. You blink, confused, staring at the voice like it's grown horns. Outside? You ask. The voice grunts. Trebuchet drills. You're the target dummy. Then it's gone. You drag on your padded gambeson, stiff from sweat and previous regrets, and strap on a helmet that smells like someone died in it, which statistically is probably true. You meet the others in the courtyard, where a small bleary-eyed group of trainees and guards are already assembling, with packs, poles and a pair of overworked mules. The plan, it turns out, is to simulate a field camp outside the castle. A quick defensive structure, minimal protection. You'll be stationed in it while the castle tests its newly repaired trebuchet, the big one they just reassembled last week. And no, you're not standing in the actual line of fire, you're standing near it. Comforting, right? As you march out beyond the moat, it strikes you how exposed everything feels. The castle behind you looks massive and invincible, while you're standing in an open field with nothing but a few planks and a canvas tarp for shelter. This is what a siege starts like, for the unlucky ones caught outside the walls. And suddenly, you understand why people trampled each other, trying to get in when the horn sounded. The trebuchet is already looming in the field. It's enormous. An awkward mix of elegance and terror, like a ballerina crossed with a sledgehammer. The long throwing arm is cocked back, counterweight hanging like a guillotine. It creaks as the engineers move around it, adjusting tension, checking knots, measuring trajectory. You're informed that this one has a name, Old Griselda. Someone's painted eyes on the frame, and she's not smiling. You and the other recruits are led to a safe-ish zone off to the side, about 60 yards from the impact zone. Still too close for comfort. A senior engineer explains how the thing works, gesturing excitedly with a stick while pointing to diagrams in the dirt. You only catch pieces, counterweight, sling, release trigger, but what sticks is that the stone's this beast. Throws can punch through walls, flatten towers, or liquefy the contents of anyone standing where they shouldn't be. They load Griselda with a test shot, a boulder the size of a sheep coated in chalk for visibility. The sling is adjusted, the rope drawn taut, and everyone clears back as the order is given. The release mechanism is triggered with a thunk that you feel in your chest. The arm whips forward in a blur, the sling snaps upward, and the stone arcs skyward with a haunting silence, until it crashes down half a second later with a bone-rattling boom. Dirt erupts in all directions. The shockwave hits like a punch. You stagger, squinting through the dust, and find that the boulder has slammed into the target zone with horrifying accuracy. If that had been a siege tower, or a troop formation, or, God forbid, a tent full of sleeping soldiers, it would be a massacre. The castle isn't just a place to hide, it is a machine that throws rocks like the hand of God. Here's a historical fact that'll keep you awake later. Trebuchets could hurl projectiles over 300 pounds at speeds fast enough to destroy stone walls. They were terrifyingly precise when operated by skilled crews, and some were built to throw bodies. Dead horses, corpses infected with plague, launched into enemy camps to spread disease, the siege equivalent of a go-away letter. Quirky fact. In one famous siege, a besieging army used a trebuchet to return a severed messenger's head that had been thrown into their camp earlier. No note, just the head, arcing majestically through the air. Message received. As the drill continues, you're given tasks. Build a makeshift shelter using only canvas and stakes, help haul counterweight stones from the supply cart, and then, you guessed it, help test Griselda with special payloads. These aren't real siege shots, thank goodness, but experimental loads. Baskets filled with gravel, wooden barrels stuffed with straw, even a pig carcass meant to simulate weight and impact. The pig one is especially grim. It hits the ground with a wet, echoing slap that makes several recruits gag. There's a lot of waiting between launches, and as you sit on the grass watching the next stone being loaded, a strange thought creeps in. What if you were out here under siege? What if the castle wasn't yours anymore, and that trebuchet was pointed in your direction? Suddenly the open sky feels like a threat. The air too still, the ground too exposed. That's the worst part, you realise. During a siege, people don't die in glorious battle. They die from waiting, from being worn down, from being outside the wall when the trebuchets start to sing. And that's where the scholarly debate comes in. Some historians argue that trebuchets weren't used as often as we think, mainly due to how difficult they were to build, transport, and maintain. Others insist they were the mainstay of siege warfare in the later Middle Ages, cheaper and more reusable than gunpowder, and psychologically devastating. One well-placed shot could collapse morale faster than an army charge. Late in the day, you're given a turn on the pull team. You help reset the arm, dragging ropes backward with a group of grunting, red-faced trainees. It's brutal work. Every joint screams. The counterweight groans. The frame shudders under the tension. When you finally lock the arm back into position, you can feel the energy just waiting. One mistake, one slipped rope, and Griselda doesn't just launch a stone, she launches you. After the final test shot, you're dismissed. Your back aches. Your fingers are raw. You stink of sweat, dust, and whatever leaked out of that unfortunate pig. As you trudge back toward the castle, the drawbridge lowers just enough to let your group inside, and you look over your shoulder at the still silhouette of the trebuchet in the fading light. It sits quiet now, but you know better. That thing's no relic. It's a warning. A long wooden finger pointing toward the future and saying, "Stay away, or we'll crack the sky open." Inside the gate, as you collapse on your mat with a groan, you understand something new. The castle isn't just a fortress, it's a slingshot, a trap, a monster with its own arms and teeth. And when it wants to, it throws boulders the size of oxen. You just hope you're never standing on the wrong side of the launch. The next morning you're stiff. Not the slept funny kind of stiff, the full-body battle simulation flung rocks and dead pigs kind. Every muscle protests as you roll off your mat, and your joints sound like someone cracking walnuts. You tell yourself that maybe today will be easier. Fewer weapons, fewer buckets of mystery goo, a little less of everything that tries to kill you just for waking up. No such luck. You're ordered to the kitchens, which sounds like a punishment for someone who dropped a torch or spilled soup on the constable. But no, today you're there because you're helping prepare for a siege drill. Specifically, you're handling the rations, learning in vivid, stomach-churning detail what it means to feed a castle cut off from the world for weeks or months. Spoiler alert, you're going to appreciate rats more than you ever thought possible. The kitchen is enormous by medieval standards anyway, but dark and smoky, lit mostly by the narrow windows and open flames. Piles of vegetables, roots, and aging meat sit stacked in baskets. Barrels of salt pork line the walls, their brine dark and murky. A pot of porridge bubbles over a fire, and the smell is functional. That's the best word for it. It keeps you alive. It doesn't make you smile. You're assigned to sort through the stores. This means picking out the good from the truly horrifying. There's a sack of grain with more bugs than grain, dried apples that look like they've seen war, a wheel of cheese so hard the cook uses it to hammer nails. You point to it and ask, "Is that still food?" The cook just shrugs and hands you a chisel. Then there's the meat. Oh, the meat, salted and smoked, yes, but storage isn't magic. A side of beef is unwrapped to reveal something that's technically still edible, but smells like it's been dead twice. The senior kitchen hand grins, toothless and cheerful. "We'll boil it twice, maybe add vinegar. You won't even taste it. You suspect you will taste it. Forever." Here's the reality check. During a siege, food preservation becomes a deadly game. The salt pork, beans, peas, dried fruits, hardtack, all have to last, often longer than anyone predicted. There are no fresh deliveries, no foraging, no trade. What's in the cellar when the gates close is it. And when it runs out, you get creative, dangerous creative. So here's your historical fact. During the longest sieges of the medieval period, people did in fact eat rats, and dogs, and shoes, if the leather was soft enough. One chronicled account from a French siege describes a stew made of parchment boiled until soft, and you thought oatmeal was bad. Your quirky fact? In at least one documented case, a castle under sea held a feast just as the enemy forces encircled them. The lord ordered wine poured generously and meat roasted loudly, so the attackers would assume the stores were full and leave sooner. In truth, they were almost out of everything. It was a bluff, a noisy, greasy bluff. Today's task includes inventory, and that means descending into the lower cellars. You don't like the lower cellars. They are dark, damp, and filled with the hum of flies and the sound of things scuttling just out of torchlight. You go with 2 other recruits, carrying a chalk slate and a sense of dread. Down there, you see just how desperate things can get. A barrel of pickled fish has gone sour, its lid warped and leaking something oily. A stack of root vegetables has collapsed into a puddle of slime. One wall is lined with jars of preserved fruits, most of them untouched since who knows when. One jar, when unsealed, hisses like it's angry. You reseal it and pretend it never happened. Then you find the real problem. Mould, lots of it. It's taken root in the back wall and spread across sacks of flour like a fuzzy grey tide. You point it out to the senior kitchen hand. He squints, sighs and says, "Scrape off the top, the rest is fine." You wonder if this logic also applies to humans. But it's not just the food. You're starting to notice something more troubling. The people. The garrison is on edge, tense. The drill hasn't even started yet, and everyone's already sniping at each other over small things. Who stole a heel of bread, who skipped latrine duty, who left the door to the butter room open. In tight spaces, with bad food and worse sleep, nerves fray like old rope. And that's the psychological trap of siege life. The castle walls don't just keep enemies out, they keep you in, with the same people, the same smells, the same complaints, over and over. You begin to understand why in some sieges, the biggest threat came from inside, mutiny, betrayal, or even madness. Here's the open debate. Were siege preparations truly this grim for every castle? Some historians argue that the best supplied strongholds could endure for months without too much hardship. Others point out that most castles weren't designed to hold out long term, and that sieges quickly became disasters once the first food barrel ran dry. Archaeological digs show burnt stores, shattered jars and gnawed bones, clear signs of desperation. After hours of sorting, lifting and scraping mould off your future meals, you finally get a break. You sit outside the kitchen, the air cool and clean by comparison. Someone passes around hard cheese and a crust of bread. It's tough enough to chip a tooth, but you chew slowly and think, this is the good stuff. It's only downhill from here. You overhear a guard murmuring to a cook, "If this drill turns real, I'm heading to the stables. Horse meat's better than rats." The cook just nods solemnly. Neither of them is joking. You think about the stores, the mould, the boiling vinegar meat. You think about how long you'd last if you had to depend on those cellars. And you think, most uncomfortably, about what happens when even the rats are gone. That night, you lie on your back and listen to the creaking above, to the echo of footsteps in the passage beyond, and to your own stomach, gurgling faintly from something you ate that probably shouldn't have been eaten. You understand now that siege survival isn't just about walls and weapons, it's about endurance. About how long you can go on chewing dry bread and pretending it fills you. About how much you can eat while knowing what it used to be, and who it used to be for. You fall asleep hungry, and that's a feeling you'd better get used to. By now, your body's begun to adjust to the routine, waking up stiff, eating meals that feel like punishments, spending the daylight hours learning which parts of the castle want you dead this week. But no amount of familiarity prepares you for what you discover today. The inside of the castle is somehow worse than the outside. Because once you're sealed in for real, you're not just dealing with hunger or boredom, you're dealing with plague. The sickness arrives quietly. No dramatic coughing fits or bleeding eyes at first. Just a few people complaining of headaches, then a strange silence as the kitchen serves smaller portions with fewer hands. Someone mutters that a stable boy hasn't been seen in 2 days. Another says the Castellan's steward looks pale, and not the good kind of pale. You start noticing buckets appearing in corners, not for water, but for vomit. And that's when you realise the castle isn't just a fortress, it's an incubator. You've been placed on inner patrol for the day, checking corridors and hauling waste to keep the hallways clear. A nice way of saying go pick up the things that smell bad and walk them very far away. So you do. 1 bucket, 2 buckets, 3, some filled with straw, soaked in something you don't want to think about. One with a rat corpse floating in sour water. You hold your breath, but the stench finds a way into your throat anyway. It always does. Then you get called to the chapel. That's when you know it's serious. The chapel's usually quiet, used for mumbling prayers no one really believes in until the arrows start flying. But today it's been converted into a makeshift infirmary. The pews are gone, straw beds line the stone floor, each holding someone who looks like they lost a fight with a ghost. Pale faces, shivering limbs, eyes sunken like holes in the soul. One woman tries to speak and ends up coughing something black into a rag. A young boy rocks back and forth in the corner, whispering to himself. You're told to help burn the soiled linens. It's an honour. The head healer, an older woman with grey streaks in her braids and a permanent scowl, snaps orders like she's conducting an orchestra of decay. Don't touch the bodies unless you have gloves. Don't breathe through your mouth. Don't let them cough on you. And if you feel a fever coming on, come back here, not the barracks. Understand? You nod, too afraid to say no. She hands you a bundle of bandages so soaked with fluid they feel like wet leather. You take them to the fire pit in the courtyard and drop them in. The flames hiss like they know what you're feeding them. Here's the gruesome reality. Once plague enters a castle, it's almost impossible to stop. The walls that keep an enemies out also keep the sickness in. No airflow, shed food, shed sleeping spaces, rats that crawl through pantry shelves and bite whoever's sleeping closest to the door. And people don't want to admit when they're sick, not until it's too late. No one wants to be the first one taken to the chapel floor. So let's pause here for your historical fact. Disease was one of the greatest killers in medieval sieges. Not war, not starvation, not arrows or boiling oil. Disease, bubonic plague, typhus, dysentery. Once an outbreak began inside a confined space, it spread faster than wildfire through dry timber. Siege records often list sickness as wiping out half a garrison before the enemy even breached the wall. And here's your quirky detail just for flavour. In at least one documented siege, the attackers catapulted plague corpses over the walls just to infect the defenders. That's right. Weaponised disease. You'd wake up to find a body in your courtyard bloated and stinking, and by the time you hauled it to the moat, the rats had already done their part. Today's open debate among scholars is less about whether plague spread in castles, it absolutely did, and more about how people responded. Some claim medieval lords understood the basics of quarantine better than we give them credit for, enforcing isolation, burning contaminated items, and sealing off rooms. Others argue that superstition ruled the day. Incense, prayers, and bleeding patients with leeches. Helpful? Not really. Hopeful? Sure. Back in the chapel, you're told to change the straw in the corner beds. One man groans softly as you work around him, his skin burning with fever. He's not that old, maybe 30, maybe younger. But his teeth chatter, and when he looks at you, it's with a kind of exhausted terror. Not the fear of dying, he's already past that, but the fear of how it's going to happen. Slow, cramped, dirty, alone. You want to say something comforting, but what would you even say? Hope you die quick. So you keep your mouth shut and finish the chore. Later you ask one of the guards how the sickness got in. He just shrugs. Could be anything. Rat bite, bad meat. A traveller touched the wrong door, doesn't take much. Then he leans in and whispers, "Some think it's the moat. Too close to the drinking well. You ever seen what's floating in that thing?" You have. You wish you hadn't. By sunset, the chapel has 5 more beds than it did this morning. They're filled. No one talks about it. The rest of the castle keeps moving like everything's fine. Training continues. Patrols are assigned. The kitchen still simmers its endless soup, but no one meets your eyes. Everyone's listening for the coughs. That night, you're not allowed to sleep in the barracks. You and 3 other helpers are quartered in the outer storeroom, away from the rest, just in case. You roll up in your blanket, staring at the wooden beams overhead, feeling the soreness in your throat and trying to convince yourself it's just the smoke from the fire. The silence is thick. One of the others snores. Another murmurs a prayer. You stare at the door, wondering if you should lock it, wondering if someone will come knocking, or worse, stumble in, pale and shaking, with eyes already glassy and voice already gone. The castle is silent now, but it doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like it's waiting, breeding. Because stone walls don't keep out death, they just trap it inside with you. You start the next day in a daze, bleary-eyed and bone-weary. Sleep, if it happened at all, came in tiny pieces, like crumbs left behind after a feast. The storeroom was cold and damp, and one of the other helpers thrashed in his sleep all night, muttering nonsense. Probably dreams. Hopefully dreams. You have no idea if he's infected, and you're not brave enough to ask. You just pull your collar higher and pretend the goosebumps on your arms are from the chill, not fear. You're reassigned after breakfast, which is somehow even thinner than yesterday's, to sanitation duty. Great. One of the guards hands you a long-handled wooden brush, a half-filled bucket of water and a warning. Watch your step in the guard robes. You don't ask what that means, you'll find out soon enough. The castle's latrines are known as guardia robes, which sounds fancy until you realise they're essentially holes in stone seats hanging directly over the exterior walls, or over narrow internal shafts that descend straight to the moat or a cesspit. You've passed them before and barely noticed. Small alcoves in the wall hidden behind old wooden doors. But today you're seeing them up close. Too close. The first one you're told to clean is located in the corner of a tower accessed by a narrow passage that seems to exist solely to make you rethink your life choices. The door creaks open to reveal a seat worn smooth by centuries of unfortunate business, and an opening beneath it large enough to lose a boot, or a smaller child. It smells like everything you feared. Old filth, mould, and something tangy that might be ancient urine, or might be defeat. The guard next to you shrugs. Better than the alternative, he says, and you almost laugh, because what is the alternative? A chamber pot in your sleeping space? A bucket next to your bed? You've seen people do both. This is the high-end option. You begin scrubbing, trying to ignore the splashback and whatever slimy thing just slid across your foot. The water in your bucket turns dark fast. The brush you're using is stiff and angry, like it resents its existence as much as you do. Still, you keep going, because if you don't clean the latrines, things get worse. And in a castle, worse is always waiting in the wings. Here's a gross but important historical fact. Guardrobes often dumped it directly into the moat. That's right. The same moat that was supposed to be a defensive barrier, and occasionally your last resort water source, was also a massive open-air toilet. Some castles tried to engineer clever waste channels or septic systems, but most just let gravity and bad luck handle the situation. And here's your quirky fact. In some castles, the garderobe doubled as a wardrobe. No, seriously. People would store clothes in the small room adjacent to the toilet shaft because it was believed the ammonia from the waste kept fleas away. Fashion meets fumigation. You can't make this stuff up. As you move on to the next latrine, this one on the second floor above the kitchens, you're told about the dangers of siege-time sabotage. Turns out latrines were weak points. Invaders sometimes tried to crawl up through the waste shafts to gain access to the castle from below. Imagine the level of desperation required to wade through human waste and slime in pitch-black darkness, just for a chance to get stabbed in the dark at the top. That's dedication or madness. In response, defenders sometimes fitted their garderobe chutes with bars or grates, or worse, added narrow curves in the shafts so no human could squeeze through. You find yourself staring into the hole, imagining an enemy soldier's face suddenly appearing, eyes wide, nose first into a wall of old castle funk. It's a horrifying mental image, and kind of hilarious. But there's a deeper problem here too. Disease. You already know the chapel's filling with plague victims, and now you understand how the filth from these guardrobes, piled in corners, leaking into soil, spilling into the moat, contributes to it. Sanitation isn't just gross, it's deadly when it's ignored. By late afternoon, you're so used to the smell you barely notice it. Your fingers are raw from scrubbing, your back aches from crouching, and your knees feel like they've aged 50 years. You're told to help reinforce a wooden seat that's beginning to crack. As you remove the splintering plank, something slithers below and disappears into the darkness. A rat? A snake? You don't want to know. You just hammer down a new seat and move on. That evening, while eating dinner, boiled barley and something that might once have been cabbage, you hear a loud commotion in the hall. A boy has fallen into the waste pit beneath one of the guardrobes. You don't hear if they pulled him out. You do hear that no one's sitting near his bedroll now. You ask the steward if the pit will be emptied. He laughs. Emptied into what? We're lucky it's not overflowing yet. And that's the terrifying part. These systems were never meant to last long. Not with this many people, not under siege. Here's your scholarly debate. Some historians argue that castle latrines were surprisingly advanced, especially in newer fortifications. Sophisticated waste channels, vented shafts, even rudimentary water flushing systems in places like the Middle East. But others point out that the average European castle wasn't nearly so clean, and when things broke, they didn't get fixed, they got covered up. You retreat to your sleeping spot that night with the smell of vinegar and human filth lingering in your nose, stuck so deep it feels permanent. You want to bathe, but there's no water to spare, so you lie there in the dark, trying not to scratch at the itch on your leg and wondering if it's just dirt or if you've picked up something alive. The rats scratch in the beams above. You stare at the ceiling, exhausted, but too aware of your own skin to sleep. You turn once, twice, then give up and roll to your side, away from the warmth of your blanket, because even that smells like what you cleaned today. And the most unsettling realization creeps in as you drift, half asleep. The guardrobe is still safer than the courtyard. At least no one dies immediately in the latrine, just slowly and quietly, which, in this castle, might be considered mercy. You're not sure what wakes you. Maybe the clanging of iron against iron, maybe the howling wind squeezing through the cracks in the stone walls. But when your eyes snap open, you know immediately it's your turn on night watch. Again, you feel like your body's been borrowed and returned badly. You sit up, pulling on your tunic with hands that don't want to bend, and shuffle out to meet the same miserable shift rotation you've come to know all too well. Tonight, you're assigned the eastern parapet. That's the long stone wall facing the forest, the one everyone agrees is quiet, until it very much isn't. You climb the stairs with a half loaf of hard bread in your pocket, boots scuffing the steps, and make your way along the ramparts. The wind up here is merciless, slicing straight through the layers of wool and linen, like you're wearing nothing at all. You wrap your cloak tighter and lean into it, blinking against the cold. The castle at night is a different creature. Gone are the training shouts, the clang of forges, the grumbling of servants. Now it's quiet, eerily so. You can hear the flags snapping overhead, the occasional snort of a horse in the stables below, and your own heartbeat, loud in your ears. The stars hang cold and indifferent above you, and in the distance the tree line looks like a row of silent giants waiting to move. You meet your postmate, a guard named Bren, whose armour is held together more by stubbornness than straps. He gives you a nod and not much else. That's fine. Talking wastes warmth. You both settle into place behind the crenellations, spears close, eyes scanning the dark. Every few minutes you step to a different section and peer through the gaps in the stone. Sometimes you're sure you see movement. A flicker in the trees, a shadow between two rocks. But it's nothing. Always nothing. Probably. Time slows to a crawl. The cold sinks deeper, past your skin, into your ribs, your joints, your soul. You stamp your feet, flex your fingers, huddle tighter. You'd do anything for a fire. But fires on the wall are a luxury reserved for well-funded castles, and yours is not that. Here's the reality. Night watch is brutal. Not because of what might happen, but because nothing usually does. It wears you down, hour by hour, thought by thought. You start to imagine things, sounds that aren't there, shapes that move, eyes that might be watching. Here's your historical fact. Night watch rotations in castles were often short, 1 to 2 hours max, because long shifts could lead to frostbite, hallucinations, or worse, a dozing sentry. And a sleeping guard during a siege? That's how castles fall. Some lords enforce strict penalties, whipping, imprisonment, even death, for falling asleep on the wall. You might be a soldier, but you're also bait. Stay awake. Your quirky fact. Some castles had designated alarm pots. Literal clay pots filled with stones or bells that could be thrown down stairwells or corridors to alert everyone in case of an attack. If you dropped one by accident, though, you better be ready to explain why the garrison is now fully armed and panicked at 3 a.m. Back on the wall, Bren taps your arm and points. There, he whispers. You squint. There's a flicker of orange between the trees, very faint, like a candle caught in the wind. It disappears, then returns. You both watch for a long moment, frozen. Campfire? You ask, voice low. Too far to tell, he says. Could be a trap, or just villagers poaching. He shrugs. Not our call, but now your heart's racing. You remember what they told you about decoys, fires lit just close enough to draw attention, only to lure defenders out into an ambush. You don't want to be tonight's bait. The signal bell doesn't ring, so no one's rushing to arms. Still, you stay tense, shifting your weight from foot to foot, trying to keep blood flowing. The bread in your pocket has frozen into a brick, but you gnaw at it anyway, partly for the salt, mostly for something to do. Around the second hour, Bren's head starts to droop. You nudge him, and he snaps awake with a grunt. I wasn't asleep, he mumbles, which is definitely the first thing you say when you were. You swap places, giving him a moment to pace while you lean against the merlon, and try not to think about how much colder the stone feels with each passing minute. There's a story passed among the guards about a man who fell asleep on watch. When he woke, the enemy was already in the courtyard. The next morning, the lord had him nailed to the wall. You're not sure if it's true, but the lesson sticks. Scholars debate just how common actual night attacks were. Some say most battles were fought by daylight, when command structure could function and formations held. Others argue that nighttime was perfect for small incursions, scaling parties, sappers, assassins. The fear of a surprise ladder reaching the top wall was enough to keep everyone's eyes wide open. As your shift nears its end, you find yourself whispering to the stars. Nothing profound, just small thoughts. Please let the next guy be warm. Please let no one die tonight. Please let that light in the woods be nothing. Finally, you hear boots on the stairs. The next shift has arrived. 2 fresh guards, still yawning but less frozen. You step aside with a grunt, muscles locking as you try to stretch. Bren offers them a silent salute and begins the painful trudge back down the stairs with you. The warmth of the inner castle hits you like a wall. It's still not warm exactly, but it's not the wind-whipped, frostbite-inducing hell of the outer parapet. You strip off your cloak, steam rising from your shoulders, and collapse on your mat without even unlacing your boots. Your hands still ache. Your back is a single knot. Your eyes feel sandpapered. And the worst part? You'll do it again tomorrow. You fall asleep thinking about the firelight in the trees. Still flickering, still there, waiting. You wake up with someone's elbow in your ribs and the muffled sound of a horn echoing through the stone. At first, you think it's just the usual morning chaos. Another drill, another fun surprise from the garrison captain, who apparently thrives on other people's misery. But then the tone of the horn changes. It's fast, sharp, urgent, and that's when your stomach drops. You're out of your blanket in seconds, grabbing your belt, your boots, anything you can reach. Others are doing the same, scrambling up, bumping into each other, swearing, as they hop on one foot trying to get dressed. No one really knows what's happening, only that the horn means something's out there. You rush toward the west wall. The guards are already assembling along the battlements, bows in hand, spears raised, eyes wide. You take your place behind the parapet, peering over the edge, and sure enough, there it is, movement in the trees. Riders, maybe a dozen, darting between trunks, too far to make out their colours, no banners, just shapes moving fast and low like wolves. And then an arrow comes in, whistling past your ear. The guards shout. Orders are barked. The first volleys fly, and for the next few minutes the world becomes a flurry of noise and panic. You duck as more arrows hiss overhead. Some strike the stone wall, others clatter off shields or land harmlessly into the courtyard, but not all of them miss. A scream rises from your left. One of the younger squires clutches his thigh, blood already soaking through his tunic. Another man stumbles back from the parapet, an arrow protruding from his shoulder. The captain yells at him to stay down, and just like that, you realise what's really happening. We're shooting at them, but they're shooting at us too. And here's the kicker. Friendly fire doesn't care. In the chaos, arrows fly both ways. Aiming becomes guesswork. Visibility's a joke. You watch a defender turn just as one of your own archers looses an arrow meant for the trees. The shot hits him square in the side. Not a deep wound, but enough to drop him. People scream, people curse, and then you hear the worst thing yet. Hold your fire! Because now someone's trying to tell who's who, and no one can. Here's your historical fact for the day. Friendly fire was a constant and terrifying part of medieval combat. There were no flashing indicators, no uniforms in neon colours. You couldn't always tell an ally from an enemy, especially at a distance or in the fog of war. When arrows flew, they didn't come with names. In sieges especially, defenders often accidentally hit their own. In the dark, during storms, amid the smoke of fire or pitch, archers loosed arrows into shadows that turned out to be their own patrols returning to the gate. People died for being in the wrong place at the wrong second. Your quirky fact? In some sieges, messengers carried long wooden paddles with painted symbols to identify themselves from above, like medieval "don't shoot" signs. Didn't always work. One poor soul reportedly waved the wrong paddle during a night mission, and got skewered by 3 arrows before he could even explain. Back on the battlements, you're doing everything you can to stay out of the way. The archers are leaning hard into the loops, arrows hissing overhead like angry hornets, and you realise something awful. No one's tracking the count. No one knows who's firing where. Some of the arrows are being returned, yes, but not all of them. Some are being fired in panic into nothing. You duck just as another friendly archer spins to fire along the wall and looses his arrow a fraction too early. The shaft clips the helm of the man beside him, sending it spinning. No blood, thankfully, but the force knocks him backward against the stone. The archer swears. "I didn't see him," he says, and you believe him. The chaos is total. The captain is roaring now. "Identify your line! Keep your targets forward!" But it's too late. 2 men are down from misfires. One is bleeding from a shallow graze to the face, his own comrade's arrow having skipped off the wall and sliced him across the cheek. The kind of wound that gets infected in these conditions. And here's the thing, they knew this could happen. Everyone knows it could happen. There's even a protocol, staggered positions, clear shooting lanes, elevation awareness. But when the fight begins, all of that goes out the window. You're not calculating angles, you're trying not to die. And sometimes your own side becomes the threat. By the time the skirmish ends, the trees are quiet again. The riders are gone, melted into the forest like ghosts. No one knows what they were doing, scouting maybe, testing the defences. No one really cares right now, the real damage is inside the walls. 4 wounded from arrows, 3 of those from friendly fire. One of them lies very still. You help carry him down from the battlements. He's young, you don't even know his name. He has curly hair matted with blood and a single shaft sticking out of his lower back. It wasn't a clean hit. He gasped once when you lifted him. Now, nothing. The healer doesn't even look hopeful, just sighs and moves on. You spend the afternoon with the others cleaning the blood from the stone. There's no ceremony, just water, ragses, and silence. One of the archers who hit someone won't speak. He's in a corner of the yard, staring at his bow like it betrayed him. Maybe it did. Here's your scholarly debate. Some argue that friendly fire in medieval battles was rare. Trained archers knew how to space themselves, how to read the field. Others say it was far more common than reported. The confusion of battle, especially during sieges and ambushes, made it inevitable, and no one liked to record their own mistakes. You sleep light that night, helmet by your bed, spear at arm's reach. Not because you expect another attack, but because you now understand something awful. The walls don't just shield you from what's out there, they can't protect you from what's in here. Your comrades, your friends, even your own trembling hands. Because in a castle, everyone's armed, and panic makes accuracy optional. They don't call it the dungeon, not out loud. That word has too much drama, too much storybook flair. Instead, they call it the lower hold, or if they're feeling particularly neutral, the stone chamber beneath. But when the Castellan tells you this morning that you're needed below, you know exactly where you're going, and your stomach sinks like a rock in the moat. The entrance is small and unassuming, just a narrow door at the base of the central keep, with rusted hinges and a lock the size of your fist. A guard unlocks it with a ring of keys that jangle like bones. Inside, a steep winding staircase curls down into the dark. You descend slowly, each step colder than the last. The walls weep moisture, the air is stale and iron-scented, and somewhere far below, water drips with a maddening rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. At the bottom, a short corridor stretches forward, ending in a small iron gate. Through it lies a chamber carved from the bedrock itself. You wouldn't even call it a room, it's a cavity. Cold, black, and barely tall enough to stand in. Chains hang from the wall, some still stained with rust, or maybe not rust. You've been told to help move a prisoner, and now you're standing face to face with what a medieval castle does to someone it doesn't kill outright. The man is slumped in the corner, hands bound in front of him with rope that's grown into his skin. His face is half bearded, half gaunt and bruised around the eyes. He doesn't even look up when the door opens. You wonder how long he's been down here. A week? A month? Time doesn't mean anything in places like this. The guard beside you nudges him with a boot. On your feet! The prisoner groans but doesn't move. The guard shrugs. Then carry him. And just like that, you're pulling the man up under his arms, his weight shockingly light. He smells like damp wool, rot, and something more bitter, like old fear. You haul him to a small side chamber where someone, some merciful soul or cruelly precise official, will question him. You're told to stay outside during the process. You can still hear it, though. The murmuring voices, the scraping of a chair, the wet cough that follows, then silence. That's somehow worse than any scream. Here's your historical fact, Ors. Medieval dungeons weren't always about torture. In many castles they were used primarily for containment. Noble prisoners were often treated with a surprising level of respect, given cots, food, even reading material. But lower-ranked enemies, suspected traitors, or unfortunate peasants caught stealing bread, they got this: stone cells, minimal light, no sanitation. Sometimes chained to the wall, sometimes just left in a hole and forgotten. And here's your quirky fact of the day. In one English castle, they found a prisoner's skeleton still shackled to the wall, except the wall had been sealed shut. A new corridor had been built over the old cell, trapping the man in complete darkness until he died. Was it intentional, a mistake? No one knows. But he's still there. When the door finally creaks open again, the man is limp but alive. Barely. The guard waves you in, and you carry him back to his cell. No one speaks. You lay him down as gently as you can on the thin pile of straw, and for the first time his eyes meet yours. Not a plea, not even anger, just emptiness, like someone who's already buried himself inside his own mind. And the worst part? You still don't know what he did. You ask the guard later, trying to sound casual. He shrugs. Could be anything. He was caught climbing the wall. Could have been a scout, or just a drunk with bad aim. You ask if anyone's certain. The guard raises an eyebrow. Don't need to be sure, just need to be safe. That sits with you. You're dismissed, told to wash before returning to the barracks. You don't bother asking where. The water for bathing is reserved for people who didn't just come from the lower hold. You scrub your hands with a rag until the skin turns red. You still feel the rope marks on the prisoner's arms when you close your eyes. That night you ask one of the older guards if he's ever been inside the cell himself. He laughs, a dry, mirthless sound. Once, long time ago, caught stealing rations during a winter siege. Just wanted to feed my brother. He doesn't elaborate. You don't ask what happened to the brother. Here's the scholarly debate. Just how cruel were medieval dungeons, really? Some argue that torture was rare and overblown in modern imagination, used sparingly, mostly for extreme cases. Others point to surviving records of Iron Maidens, the rack, the boot, and devices so specific in their pain delivery, you wonder what kind of minds came up with them. The truth, likely, lies somewhere awful in between. After dinner, a stew is so bland you're not sure it ever touched a spice. You lie back on your mat and try not to think about the man in the lower hold, but your mind returns to the sound of dripping water, the iron tang of the air, the way the cell swallowed light like a throat. You think about justice, about guilt, about how easy it is to disappear in a place like this. One bad moment, one wrong accusation, one look at the wrong nobleman, and down you go, into the stone belly of the castle where time freezes and names are forgotten. And no one outside will ever know, because the castle doesn't care why you're down there. It only cares that you are. The fire starts during the noon meal. One moment you're gnawing on a piece of stale bread that could double as masonry. The next there's shouting from the upper levels, then smoke curling down the stairwell like some ancient warning. For a moment no one moves. Maybe it's just the kitchen, you think. Maybe a log slipped, or the stew boiled over, or someone knocked over a candle again. But then you hear it. That high-pitched, panicked tone in a soldier's voice that only ever means one thing, a real danger. "Fire in the east wing," someone yells, and suddenly the great hall erupts into chaos. Benches crash backward, bowls clatter to the stone floor, and the castellan is on his feet shouting orders. You grab your cloak and follow the rush of boots and panic breathing toward the smoke. You've never seen anything like it. At first, it's just a haze, swirling through the corridor like a bad dream. But as you reach the upper levels, the air thickens, sharp with the bitter scent of burning wood, scorched fabric, and something else, hot, greasy, and wrong. The east wing houses the servants' quarters, storerooms, and, worst of all, the hayloft. That's where the real trouble is. By the time you arrive, flames are already licking at the beams overhead. The walls glow orange. Heat blasts your face like you've opened an oven that wants to eat you. Two soldiers are dragging a coughing boy out of the corridor, his hair singed, his eyes wide with terror. One of them shouts, "Buckets! Chained to the well!" And suddenly you're back outside, sprinting toward the courtyard, heart pounding. The well is already mobbed. Buckets fly from hand to hand, splashing wildly as people form a human chain. You grab one, pass it, grab another. The water is cold, but it steams as it meets the heat of the corridor. You get into the rhythm, pass, turn, grab, pass, but your eyes keep drifting to the tower, to the rising black smoke, to the knowledge that this castle, this fortress of stone and strength, is vulnerable to something as basic as fire. Here's the truth no one wants to admit. Castles burn. Yes, the outer walls are stone. Yes, the great keeps are solid and enduring, but the interiors, wood, floors, beams, doors, stairs, even ceilings, all timber. Many were patched and repaired with the cheapest materials available, which meant flammable tar, dried rushes, and old thatch. And once fire takes hold, it moves fast. And the stone? It traps the heat. The castle becomes an oven. Here's your historical fact. Several real castles were gutted by fire, either by accident or during sieges. In 1216, Corfe Castle burned so badly it collapsed in parts. Chateau Gaillard in France, thought to be impregnable, was nearly destroyed from within after fire broke out during a siege. Enemy weapons weren't always the threat, sometimes it was your own torch falling at the wrong time. And here's your quirky fact. Some castle kitchens had literal fire tunnels built into the walls, vents and channels to let heat and smoke escape without setting the rest of the castle on fire. They worked great, until they didn't. Rats sometimes nested in them. Tar built up, one spark was enough. Back in the east wing, the situation's growing worse. Someone yells that the roof's about to go, the bucket chain moves faster. You and a group of soldiers manage to break open a door and douse the threshold, slowing the spread. But the smoke is thick now, choking, and your eyes sting so bad you can barely see. You pull your cloak over your mouth and dive in with another bucket, the heat searing your skin even through the wet wool. You help carry out another servant, an older woman with soot streaked across her face. She mutters something between coughs. The tapestries are gone, everything gone. You barely hear her. Your ears are ringing. There's ash in your hair, in your nose, under your nails. Eventually the fire's beaten back. Not fully out, but contained. The upper corridor is blackened, charred beams still smouldering. Water puddles on the floor where the buckets spilled, turning soot into oily sludge. The air tastes like iron and ruin. The castle's quiet for a long time after that. No drills, no yelling, just clean up. The kind where everyone moves slowly, like they're dreaming underwater. You help remove debris, half-burnt doors, collapsed rafters, the skeleton of a storage rack. The smell never really goes away. Later, the Castellan addresses the garrison in the hall. No grand speeches, just facts. No lives lost, he says. 4 injured. East wing closed until rebuilt. All candles restricted after sundown. Then he nods, turns, and leaves. That's it. You talk to one of the older guards over dinner. He tells you about a fire years ago, during another siege. They breached the gate, he says, but we lit the hall behind it before they got in. Smoke choked half the first wave. We just waited, spears ready, didn't even have to fight much, he shrugs. Fire does the work. That's when it hits you. Fire doesn't care who started it. In battle, in peacetime, by accident or design, it takes what it wants. It doesn't stop for orders. And once it's inside the castle, the thick walls and narrow halls just trap it. Smother the screams, cook everything slowly. Here's the debate among scholars. Was fire more of a threat during sieges, or just everyday life in a medieval castle? Some argue that siege fires catapulted pots of burning pitch, flaming arrows, even naphtha, were decisive weapons. Others point to records of dozens of castles damaged simply by bad luck and open flames, without a single enemy in sight. That night, as you try to sleep, the smell of smoke still clings to your clothes, your skin, your hair. You dream of fire, not the bright, clean kind, but the kind that creeps and clings and whispers. You wake up coughing, throat dry, eyes watering. There's no smoke now, just memory. But that's enough, because you realise for the first time that the castle isn't just a trap made of stone and steel, it's a tinderbox, and you're living in it. Winter doesn't sneak in, it kicks the door open and makes itself at home, taking over every corner of the castle like it was always meant to rule here. You wake up to frost on your blanket and a nose so cold you have to check it's still attached. Your breath fogs the air in short bursts, and the stone beneath you has gone from uncomfortable to maliciously cold. Someone jokes that it's warmer outside, no one laughs. You're assigned to duty in the keep today, the inner heart of the castle where, allegedly, things are a bit warmer. They are not. If anything, the keep holds cold like it's collecting it for some kind of architectural competition. The walls radiate chill. The floors bite your feet through your boots. Every torch seems to do little more than show you how cold everything still is. Your first task is to help lay fresh rushes in the Great Hall. These are supposed to insulate the stone floor, trap dirt and absorb moisture. In theory. In practice, they also trap every crumb, flecket of grease and mouse dropping accumulated since the last time someone replaced them, which was probably sometime in the previous century. As you spread the new layer, you find bones, a dead beetle the size of your thumbnail, and something unidentifiable that smells like bad choices. There's no fire going in the hearth yet. Wood is too precious. With winter here, every log is rationed, every coal carefully tended. The hall's massive chimney is cold and dark, like a yawning mouth that's forgotten how to breathe. You hunch your shoulders and keep working, the reeds rustling under your hands as your fingers grow numb. Here's the part they never put in the stories. Castles are absolutely miserable in winter. The thick stone walls hold heat in summer, yes, but they also lock in cold like a punishment. There's no insulation, no glass in the windows, just slits or shutters that creak and rattle in the wind. You wear every piece of clothing you own at once, and it's still not enough. Your historical fact for the day: medieval castles were notorious for being freezing cold during the winter months, particularly in regions with damp climates. Lords and ladies retreated to inner chambers, smaller rooms with lower ceilings, in an effort to preserve warmth. Fires burned day and night in some keeps, but for the rest of the garrison, servants, soldiers, squires, it was layers and shivering. The quirky fact: in some places, they didn't even sleep lying flat during the coldest nights. People sat upright against walls, bundled together, sharing heat like penguins in a freezing stone nest. One account from a northern castle describes men sleeping around a soup cauldron that doubled as a bed warmer when empty. After the rushes, you're sent to the pantry to help count winter stores. The inventory is bleak. Half a barrel of dried peas, some smoked fish that were hanging by a thread, literally, and a few wheels of cheese that look more weapon than food. The cook mutters that he'll need to start watering the broth even more. You nod, thinking back to the last meal, and how it already tasted like dishwater with ambition. Outside, snow begins to fall. You watch it swirl past the arrow slits. Soft, slow, and utterly silent. Beautiful from a distance. But you know what it means. It means the roads are closed. No carts, no trade, no messengers, no firewood unless someone is brave enough to go out and chop it. Your next assignment? Latrine duty. Of course, because nothing says castle life like emptying chamber pots in freezing weather. The trick, you learn, is to do it fast, before the contents freeze solid. You slip twice on the stairs, nearly dumping the whole bucket over your own boots. The guard watching chuckles. Think of it as making ice sculptures, he says. Even the animals are miserable. The stables are half covered in frost. The horse's breath comes in great plumes. The chickens huddle together like they've designed a ceasefire out of sheer necessity. You toss hay into the stalls with stiff fingers and try not to think about the fact that, if the winter lasts too long, those same animals might end up on your plate. At dinner, you're handed a wooden bowl of what they're still calling stew. You don't ask what's in it, you just eat. Slowly, carefully, like you're trying not to make the food angry. It's warm, at least. That's all that matters now. Later that night, in the barracks, people start whispering about firewood. Some claim there's still a hidden pile somewhere near the chapel. Others say the Castellan has stashed a personal supply in the upper keep. And someone, not you but someone, is going to go looking for it. That's how castle winters go, not just freezing, but tense. Everyone's cold, everyone's hungry, everyone's looking for someone else to blame. Here's your scholarly debate. Did medieval castles really get as cold as modern people imagine? Some argue that thick tapestries, wool clothing and central hearths kept things reasonably comfortable. Others point to contemporary complaints from nobles themselves. Letters describing unbearable draughts, frostbitten fingers, and hot wine turning cold in the cup. The evidence leans toward, yes, it was awful. You wrap yourself in your cloak and lie down on the rushes, curled like a dying spider. Your breath curls upward, and for a second you can almost pretend it's smoke from a warm fire, but it fades and you're still freezing. The man beside you mumbles something and pulls his cloak tighter, and you inch closer, not for friendship, just survival. There's no real sleep, just a few hours of shivering in the dark, waiting for morning, waiting for spring, waiting for warmth to find its way back through the stone. The castle isn't trying to kill you directly now, it's just letting winter do the work. You've been dreading this day since the first time you laid eyes on the wall's outer edge, the part where the siege ladders would go, the part where people climb, where people fall. Today you're the climber. The captain's voice had a note of casual cruelty when he announced the drill this morning. Ladder training. You lot are storming the castle. Someone behind you groaned. Someone else swore. You just stared ahead, already feeling your stomach start to rebel. Now you're outside the walls, in a training yard rigged to mimic the real thing. The castle gates stay shut behind you like the teeth of some beast that only lets blood go in. On the ground, a pile of wooden ladders, notched and splintered, leaning against the towering stone. They look like oversized garden tools built by lunatics. A few are roped together with questionable knots. One of them already has a broken rung, and another looks like it was repaired with a butchered chair leg. The walls loom above you, 40, maybe 50 feet high, narrow crenellations on top, murder holes above that. You know what's up there, arrows, rocks, boiling, whatever, and defenders who see you as little more than a climbing rat. You're handed a shield, not to use, just to haul, and a dulled practice sword that might as well be a stick. The captain's instructions are simple. Climb, don't fall, try to touch the top. If you make it all, we might not mock you. The first man goes up fast, eager. He makes it about halfway before his boot slips. He screams and hits the ground with a crunch that shuts everyone up for a solid 5 seconds. He doesn't get back up. The medic hurries over. You're next. You grab the ladder. It's colder than expected. You plant your foot on the lowest rung, lift your body and start to climb. At first, it's not so bad. Your arms and legs move together in rhythm. The wood creaks, but it holds. You're maybe 10 feet up when the wind hits you, sharp, insistent. It cuts across your face and pushes you into the wall, scraping your fingers on the stone. You keep going. 15 feet up, your legs start to burn. 20 feet, your arms shake. The ladder wobbles under your weight. And then you hear it. The slap of something landing just to your right. You glance down. Someone threw a training sack from above. Simulated debris. It missed you. This time. Another comes, and this one hits the ladder. The whole thing jolts. Your fingers slip. You slam your chest into a rung and hang there, gasping until your grip returns. You look up. The wall stretches on like a promise it never intended to keep. A veteran on the ground shouts up, "You're already dead. Just fall like a hero." It's meant as a joke. You're not laughing. Here's your historical fact. Siege ladders were one of the most direct and most dangerous methods of assaulting a castle. Soldiers climbed under fire, often burdened with armour, shields and weapons. Defenders rained arrows, rocks and boiling substances down. The success rate? Abysmal. It was less a tactic and more a sacrifice. And here's your quirky fact. Some armies tried to boost morale by attaching bells to the top of ladders. The idea was, if you heard the bell ringing at the top, it meant someone made it. Of course, most of the time the bell never rang, or if it did, it was quickly silenced by a crossbow bolt. You finally make it to within arm's reach of the top. One of the guards leans over with a practice spear and gives you a gentle prod in the forehead. It's not hard, but it's enough. You lose your balance. Your left foot slips. Your grip goes and you fall. It's fast, stupid and humiliating. You don't hit the ground like the first man. You bounce once, then land hard on your side. Pain blooms across your ribs, and for a second you can't breathe. Then the laughter starts. Some from the wall, some from your fellow climbers, even the captain chuckles. 10 points for dramatic form, he calls. You stagger to your feet, limping slightly. Your sword is gone. Your shield's cracked. You're sore in places that were already sore. And the ladder? It just stands there, daring someone else to try. The next group goes up, and the next. By mid-afternoon, 5 people have fallen. 2 limped away. 1 broke a finger. Another twisted his ankle so badly the bone might be chipped. The last guy made it to the top, touched the stone and got clobbered with a sack of sand so heavy he dropped his sword as he collapsed over the parapet. Safely, thank the saints. You sit on the ground, nursing a swollen wrist, and stare at the ladder, like it personally insulted your family. There's an argument among scholars about the use of siege ladders. Some say they were mostly symbolic, used to divide defenders' attention or support larger breaches. Others argue they were a critical part of siege warfare, especially early in a battle, to test the walls or try to create panic. Either way, the soldiers who climbed them knew exactly what they were doing, dying first. The drill ends with another speech from the captain. He's animated now, proud. That's why we build high walls, that's why we pour from above. They come with ladders, we send them back with broken necks. You shuffle off with the rest of the battered trainees. Your body hurts in new and exciting ways. Your pride is a pile of gravel. And as you return to your corner in the barracks, you find a note scrawled on the wooden post above your bedding. Nice fall. You've got style. You don't know who left it. You're too tired to care. That night, you lie awake and replay the climb in your mind. The splintering rungs, the wind, the sudden weightlessness. And the awful realization that next time, it might be you defending that wall, and someone else will be the one climbing. You don't know why you volunteered for it. Maybe it was the fever still fogging your brain. Maybe it was the captain glaring at you like he knew you hadn't earned your bruises yesterday. Or maybe you're just sick of the cold, the soup and the smell of feet in the barracks. Whatever the reason, you raised your hand when they asked for someone to help with a special task. Now you're lying on your stomach in a shallow trench, mud in your ears, digging a tunnel under the wall of a fake siege camp, and seriously reconsidering every life choice that led to this moment. Mining, or more accurately sapping, digging underneath the old castle walls in the hope of collapsing part of them. It's one of the oldest and dirtiest tricks in siege warfare. If ladders are a suicide mission and battering rams take forever, then tunnels are the clever, miserable third option. You dig under the enemy's wall, prop up the ceiling with timber beams, then set them on fire. When the support burns through, the tunnel collapses, and so does whatever's on top. Ideally, a nice chunk of castle wall, instant shortcut. Assuming you don't die first. You're not even in a real siege, and you already kind of want to. The training tunnel starts just outside the castle's south tower, part of a controlled drill meant to teach what it's like to mine, and to stop mining. You're on the attacker's side this morning, which means your job is to crawl into a 3-foot-high dirt tunnel, dig in the darkness, and try not to breathe too much of the dust that's falling constantly into your nose, your eyes, and your mouth. It's worse than you imagined. The tunnel is damp, close, and full of sounds you can't identify. Tiny pops of settling earth, the creak of wooden supports, the occasional muffled cough from someone up ahead. You're given a tiny pickaxe and a wooden spade and told to keep digging until your arm gives out or the tunnel reaches the marker chalked on the wall ahead. You're also told that if the beam above your head starts to crack, you should back out. Quickly. The air inside smells like wet socks, rotten mushrooms, and panic. You can't turn around, you can't stand, all you can do is inch forward, dragging the tools behind you, scraping away at the dirt in front of your face like some sad mud-covered worm. Here's a historical fact to really brighten your day. Castle defenders often countered tunnels with countermines. That meant while one team dug toward the wall, another dug out from the inside trying to intercept or collapse the tunnel before it reached the foundations. It was a race of inches. Sometimes the miners met underground and fought to the death in a space barely big enough for a dog to crawl through. And yes, people absolutely died in these tunnels. Collapses were common, so was suffocation. The air could turn deadly if the tunnel wasn't ventilated, and no one had the luxury of oxygen theory in the 13th century. You breathed what you had and hoped for the best. Your quirky fact. There are records of miners being rewarded with gold if their tunnel caused a wall to fall, but if it collapsed too soon and crushed their own team, their families were charged for the repairs. Nothing says employee appreciation like being taxed posthumously. Back in the tunnel, you finally reach the chalk mark. You stop digging and tap the wooden beam above your head. Nothing. You tap again, harder. Still no sound. That's good. Maybe. It means it's not actively about to collapse. Probably. You rest there, forehead pressed against cool dirt, trying to catch your breath without coughing up half the soil of the kingdom. Then you hear it, scraping from the other side. At first you think it's just your own echo, but it continues, rhythmic and wrong. There's someone digging toward you. The defenders are running their own drill, and the counter tunnel is intersecting yours. You freeze. The instructors didn't mention this happening today. You're not supposed to be this far in. You're definitely not supposed to be the first one to meet them. You don't have a weapon, just the little pickaxe, but it feels different now, like something sharp and necessary. Suddenly the dirt ahead cracks, and a hand bursts through. You yelp, fall backward, slam your head into the low ceiling. A face follows the hand. Another recruit, as startled as you. You stare at each other, covered in filth, blinking like moles. Then he grins. "Tag," he says. "You're dead." Turns out this was very much part of the drill. The instructors cackle when you both crawl out of the dirt like worms returning to the surface. Your arms are numb, your legs are cramping, you smell like a compost pile, and somewhere in the middle of that you realise this is all a game, but in a real siege, this would have ended with someone swinging a dagger in a space the size of a coffin. You spend the next hour learning how to collapse tunnels from the defender's side, dropping weighted stones through concealed shafts, flooding entrances with water barrels, even listening for faint knocking through the floor to locate enemy miners. One instructor presses his ear to the ground and says, "You feel it more than hear it, like a heartbeat in the floor." That's when you remember. The walls don't just defend you from the outside. They echo what's underneath. There's a heated debate among historians about how effective tunnelling really was. Some claim it had brought down castle walls more often than people realise, especially in areas where stone foundations were weak or clay soil was easy to dig. Others argue most mines failed before they reached the target, and the defenders usually caught them first. Either way, it was slow, dangerous, and terrifyingly personal. By sunset, you're back in the yard, covered in dust and dirt, your body screaming in ways it hasn't before. You're not even bruised this time. You're just tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes either. The kind that settles in your chest like a stone and whispers, "You survived, but only just." As you collapse onto your bedding, you think about the tunnels, the weight of the dirt overhead, the silence before a collapse, the face that came through the wall, and you wonder, just for a moment, what else might be buried beneath this place under centuries of war, death, and secrets? Because in this castle, even the ground wants you dead. There's something different in the air tonight. Not just the usual winter frost or the ever-present stink of the latrines. Something unsettling. You feel it as you pass the chapel, doors shut tight, no candles lit. You feel it as you walk through the courtyard, where no one is laughing, not even the guards, and you feel it strongest when you see the row of heads on the wall. They weren't there yesterday. You stop mid-step. Your breath fogs the air in front of you, but the chill crawling down your spine has nothing to do with the temperature. There are 5 of them, fresh, barely stiff, all enemy scouts, or so the garrison says. Beards frozen stiff, eyes closed or missing. One has his mouth open in what could be a scream or a yawn. Hard to tell. Either way, they're mounted high on the parapet spikes like grotesque decorations for some holiday you never want to celebrate. The guards don't even look at them. That's how normal this is. You've heard of psychological warfare before. You just didn't think you'd be standing under it, watching frost gather in the nostrils of the dead. The captain passes behind you and mutters, "It's messaging. We say, this is what happens when you get too close." You nod. Slowly. He walks off, humming. Later, you're told to help clean up the yard. Not bodies, those are gone, but the remains. A severed boot with a foot still in it, a broken spear, a blood trail that leads to nowhere good. You find a child's doll lying face down in the mud, missing an arm, and for a second, it's just too much. You leave it there. Here's your historical fact. Severed heads on castle walls were not just for show, they were strategic, meant to demoralise attackers, warn off traitors, and make sure no one thought too hard about switching sides. Some castles even kept a stash of preserved heads in salt to be displayed as needed. One particularly grim record notes a head being brought out twice, because the message still applied. Your quirky fact? In a few cases, castles used fake heads, painted gourds, straw-stuffed helmets, even pig heads dressed in helmets, if the real thing wasn't available. They'd display them at a distance, high on the battlements, and the enemy rarely got close enough to notice the difference. It was the silhouette that mattered. Fear doesn't need details. You're stationed later that day by the gatehouse, told to keep watch on the outer path, not because of an impending attack, but because a cart is arriving from the nearby village with supplies. Apparently someone had enough nerve or enough coin to smuggle food past enemy scouts. Risky business. When the cart finally arrives, it's piled with hay, barrels, and a single wooden crate that clinks when it moves. But something's wrong. The driver is nervous, jumpy. His eyes dart between the guards. His hands tremble when he hands over the papers. Then he says something strange. "It's not just scouts anymore," he whispers. "They're sending messages too." You lean in. What kind of messages? He doesn't answer. He just nods toward the rear of the cart, and you look. Under the tarpaulin, beneath a pile of rags, is a head. Not a soldier's. A young man, maybe 20, clean-shaven, mouth stuffed with straw like a kid's doll. You step back. The captain arrives, sees it, doesn't blink. He turns to the driver. "Where was this found?" "On the road," the man whispers. "Propped up like it was watching, dressed like one of ours. It wasn't, though, don't recognise him, just placed there." You carry the crate of food inside and leave the head for the others. There's no ceremony. It goes to the same spike-riddled wall. One more face added to the wordless conversation between two sides, locked in hate and cold and dread. That night you're pulled into the main hall for something different. A morale ritual. A feast of sorts. Bread, wine, dried fruit, small rations from stores that were supposedly off-limits. The Castellan raises a toast. To victory, to strength. To showing them we're not afraid. The guards drink. Some laugh too hard. One starts singing a war song and stumbles over the lyrics. The tension in the room isn't lifted, it's buried under noise and red wine. You're sitting near the fire when someone beside you leans in and says, "You know what they used to do in the old wars, catapult heads back over the walls, send them flying into the other side's camp." You nod slowly. "So we're not unique." He smiles grimly. "Nah, we're just next." There's a scholarly debate about just how effective psychological warfare really was during medieval sieges. Some say it did more damage than swords, weakening morale, planting doubt, sowing fear. Others argue that it hardened defenders, united them through shared horror, that the heads on spikes and corpses in trees only made people angrier, depended, they say, on how close you were to cracking already. As you leave the hall, full but unsettled, you glance back up at the battlements. The heads are still there, lit faintly by torches. Snow gathers in their hair. Their expressions don't change, but somehow they seem to watch you, not as enemies, just as warnings. You return to your blanket, curl into yourself, and try to find warmth in a fortress that's playing a very old, very cruel game. You think about the enemy outside the walls, the faces they've seen, the heads they've mounted, the fires they build, and the songs they sing in languages you don't understand. They are doing the same thing you are, surviving. You don't sleep well, because the war isn't just out there anymore, it's in your mind. You've spent so many days surrounded by soldiers, you've almost forgotten that the castle isn't just steel and stone, it's also silken whispers. Today the steward tells you that your regular duties are suspended. No mucking, no guard rotation, no night watch. You've been summoned by her, the lady of the castle, and you try not to look nervous, but the smirk on the steward's face tells you it's too late. He hands you a rough-spun tunic that doesn't fit, tells you to scrub your hands, and warns, "Mind your mouth." She's sharper than any blade hanging on those walls. The ladies' quarters are on the upper level of the keep, behind a heavy oaken door carved with a lion and a hawk. You're ushered in by a pair of guards who glance at you like they know exactly how far beneath this room you normally operate. The air inside is warm, shockingly warm. There's a brazier burning in the corner, and thick wool tapestries lining every wall. You half expect music, a feast, maybe some perfume in the air. But no, it's quieter than the grave. She sits at a large table by the window, not wearing a crown, not in some ridiculous gown, but in layered wool and a sturdy leather belt. Her hair is braided back, her hands ink-stained. She's writing furiously in Latin, and doesn't look up as you enter. You stand there like a fool, not sure whether to bow or run. Eventually she speaks. "You can read, yes?" Her voice is even, not unkind, but not patient either. You nod. A little. "Good, sit." You obey. She hands you a bundle of letters and a list of names. Nobles, merchant gents, militia leaders. You're going to help copy. There's ink, quills, parchment. Use both hands if you have to. It doesn't have to look pretty. It has to get done. And just like that, you're part of something you didn't even know existed. The castle's other war. The lady isn't here to smile at parties or flutter across balconies. She's running logistics, politics, information. She reads every report from the scouts, weighs the rations by head count, manages correspondence to distant lords who might send help if the siege turns real. She's been fighting since before you learned which end of a sword to hold. You spend hours copying letters, declarations of loyalty, warnings about enemy movements, instructions for supply wagons that may never arrive. The lady reads each one over your shoulder, correcting without apology. She doesn't praise, she just nods once and moves on. Around noon, a maid brings in food. Simple bread, cheese, wine. The lady eats standing. You chew slowly, careful not to drop crumbs on her paperwork. She tells you between bites about a siege she lived through as a child. Another castle. Another winter. They starved us. Not just of food. Of news. That's what people don't understand. Information keeps a castle alive. If you don't know what's coming, you can't stop it. You nod, but you don't really understand. Not yet. In the afternoon, you're assigned to the archives. Dusty, quiet rooms below her chambers filled with scrolls, letters, and ledgers bound in cracked leather. The clerk there is ancient and twitchy, muttering about mould and mice. He teaches you how to seal a letter with wax. You burn your thumb the first time. He smirks. Now it's official. Here's your historical fact. Noble women in medieval castles weren't just decoration. Many managed estates, negotiated alliances, and led defences during sieges. when their husbands or brothers were away or dead. Some, like Nicola de la Haye or Matilda of Tuscany, were military leaders in their own right. The lady here, she's not just surviving this castle, she is the castle. Your quirky fact? In one documented siege, a noblewoman convinced the enemy commander to delay his attack by sending him a beautifully written poem with a personal seal and a basket of spiced pears. The poem flattered him. The pears were mildly laxative. The attack was postponed. Strategy comes in many flavours. Back upstairs, the lady takes a moment to rest, and you're bold enough to ask a question. What happens if help doesn't come? She looks at you then. Really looks. Then we last longer than they do. She says it without flinching, without bravado. Just fact. Evening falls, and you're sent back to your barracks. The steward meets you at the door and looks surprised you're still walking. She didn't stab you with a quill, you're lucky. You don't reply, you're too busy thinking. You think about how the lady never raised her voice, never lost track of what needed doing, how her quill moved as quickly and surely as a dagger, how the entire castle seemed to move in rhythm with her even if most people didn't notice. There's a scholarly debate about just how much power noblewomen truly had in medieval castles. Some argue it was limited, always overshadowed by male authority, but others, those who actually read the letters, the orders, the signatures, know better. Behind every stone wall stood someone who could either hold the place together or let it fall apart. That night, as you lie on your mat listening to the usual groans and snoring, you imagine the lady sitting in her chamber, still writing, still planning while the rest of the castle drifts to sleep. You imagine her fingers ink-stained, her eyes calculating, her spine straighter than most lords you've seen. And you realise something uncomfortable. If this place ever falls, it won't be because the soldiers broke, it'll be because she did. You wake up to the sound of coughing, wet, rattling and far too close. At first you think it's the man in the next cot, the one with the wheezy chest who always mutters in his sleep. But when you sit up, rubbing your eyes, you see it's everyone. The entire barracks feels like it's breathing through wet wool. A couple of lads are hunched over the bowls, coughing so hard they're gagging. One has a bloody rag pressed to his mouth. And just like that, you know, it's back. The plague. No one calls it that, of course. They call it the bad air, or the black rash, or the cough. But it's all the same thing. The chapel's bell tolls once, long and low. You recognise the sound now. It means someone didn't wake up this morning, probably more than one. You skip breakfast. You're not hungry anymore. You're reassigned without ceremony. Just a gesture from the steward and a short, grim courtyard sanitation detail, which, given the context, could mean almost anything. When you arrive, the first thing you see is a cart covered. Two men are loading it with bodies wrapped in cloth. They move mechanically like they've done this before. They have. Your job? Lime. There's a barrel full of it beside the cart, a white, powdery substance that smells like stone and bites your skin if you touch it too long. You toss handfuls onto the bodies before they're moved. It's supposed to help. With the smell. With the decay. You don't ask if it works, you just do it. You start breathing through your sleeve. You wish you had something better, but cloth's all you've got. One of the other workers ties garlic around his neck. Another smears vinegar on his face. You'd laugh if it weren't so bleak. Here's your historical fact. Plague wasn't just a wave, it was a tide, rising and falling unpredictably. During sieges, it was especially common. Too many people crammed into too little space with too little sanitation. The Black Death came later, sure, but its cousins made plenty of appearances in castles like this. Typhoid, dysentery, and every strain of fever you can imagine. The enemy outside the walls often had to do less than the enemy already inside. Your quirky fact. Some medieval castles employed plague wardens, volunteers or unlucky conscripts tasked with isolating the sick, carrying the dead, and in some cases, burning infected belongings. In one infamous case, a warden sealed the sick inside a cellar and bricked it up. They say the moaning lasted for days. Back in the courtyard, the captain walks by without stopping. He's got a cloth tied around his face and gloves on, which tells you all you need to know. Even the tough ones are afraid now. You pass the chapel on your way to dump another bucket of waste. The doors are locked. No services. Too many sick tried to crawl there for healing. Now it's sealed until further notice. You don't know if that means when the sickness ends or when there's no one left to need it. A child runs past you, barefoot, wild-eyed. One of the stable boys. He's coughing too. You grab his arm gently. "Where's your mother?" He just shakes his head and keeps running. Someone vomits behind you. You don't turn around. That afternoon, you're told to help carry buckets to the outer wall. Not water. Ashes. They've started burning things now. Bedding, clothing, books. You hear shouting from inside one of the towers. Someone refusing to let go of a blanket. "It was my daughter's," they sob. "It smells like her still." The guards take it anyway. There's an argument among the scribes about what really caused the disease. Some say it's bad air. Others claim it's divine punishment. The most practical ones think it's rats and filth in close quarters, but no one can stop it. And that's the worst part. You're stuck behind these massive walls and nothing is keeping death out. You volunteer for latrine duty again, not because it's safer, but because it gives you space, quiet. And in some twisted way, you'd rather deal with human waste than human grief. At least the guardrobes don't cry when you take something from them. That night, the barracks are quieter than usual. Fewer coughs, fewer voices. Not because people are sleeping peacefully. They're not breathing anymore. The guards mark the cots with chalk. White cross means infected. Black circle means gone. You wake up with a mark on the floor beside your own bed. Half a chalk line started, then wiped away. You lie there wondering who changed their mind. There's a scholarly debate about how well castles handled disease. Some argue they were marvels of order, with isolation chambers, herbal remedies and community management. Others point to how quickly these structures turned into tombs, how stone keeps became prisons when disease took hold, how no one inside could escape and no one outside wanted to come in. You stop eating after the second day. Not from sickness, just from knowing. Your stomach turns at the smell of the stew, the sight of bread. Your body aches with hunger, but your mind is too full of ash and coughing and wrapped corpses to care. The steward walks past you in the yard and says nothing. He looks thinner, eyes sunken. He used to bark orders with the joy of a man who enjoys making others suffer. Now he just mutters. Before you sleep, you walk the wall. Not for duty, just for air. The stars are out. The night is clear. The enemy camps in the distance have gone quiet. Maybe they're sick too. Or maybe they're just waiting for the sickness to finish the job for them. You lean on the parapet, close your eyes and exhale. Your breath fogs the air. You think about the chapel, about the sealed door, about the girl's blanket tossed into the fire. You think about how no one dies like the songs say. Not with honour, not with grace, just coughing, and then silence. There's a knock at the barracks door before dawn, but it's not the usual bark from a grumpy guard or a bell to signal morning drill. This knock is slow, measured. You and the others freeze in place mid-yawn, mid-scratch, mid-anything. It happens again, thud, 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 and then the door creaks open. In steps a man wrapped in a thick wool cloak, face half covered, gloves black with soot. "Armourer wants 3 hands," he says flatly, eyes scanning the room. You, and you. You're the third you. So now you're up, boots barely laced, staggering after this walking pile of cinders across the courtyard toward the forge, rubbing sleep out of your eyes and wishing you'd faked a cough, like the guy snoring back on your bunk. Too late now. The forge sits like a grumpy dragon in the far corner of the inner bailey. Low-roofed, smoke curling from the chimney, the door warped from too much heat and not enough care. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of hot iron, scorched leather, and something sharper. Burnt bone, maybe, or singed hair. The armourer, a squat man with arms like tree trunks and eyebrows permanently fused into a scowl, grunts as you enter. You'll be turning bellows, running, quenching, carrying scrap. And if you drop anything, don't, that's all. You don't ask questions, you just get to it. The bellows are massive, stitched leather over a wooden frame, squealing like pigs every time you compress them. Your arms ache by the 3rd squeeze. Your shirt is soaked by the 10th. But the forge roars, the coals glow, and the armourer starts hammering red-hot steel like he's angry at it. Sparks leap in all directions, lighting the air with tiny fireworks that burn out before they land. He's shaping spearheads today, maybe for training, maybe for something worse. Each one starts as a dull rod, glows orange in the fire, and then meets the anvil with a rhythmic clang, clang, clang that rattles your ribs. Here's your historical fact. Forges were the beating heart of a working castle. Without them, there were no weapons, no armour repairs, no nails for the gates, no hinges for the doors. A castle without a functioning forge was just a very pretty coffin. And here's your quirky fact. In some castles, armourers were exempt from combat, even in sieges, because their skills were considered too vital. If they died, the rest of the garrison might follow. But in others, they were expected to fight and repair weapons under fire. There's a recorded case of an armourer fixing a crossbow with one hand while using the other to club an enemy climbing through a window. Efficiency. You're told to hold a piece of tongs while he quenches a blade, dipping the glowing metal into a barrel of cold water. It hisses violently, steam exploding upward. You're not fast enough, pulling your hand back, and a blister bubbles on your wrist. You hiss through your teeth. The armourer just nods. Now you're useful. By midday, you've moved to sorting scrap. Old chainmail, shattered sword hilts, busted arrowheads. Most of it will be melted down, reforged. Nothing goes to waste. Even broken steel has a second life. You find a mangled breastplate in the pile, folded in on itself like a crushed can. There's a dent right over where the heart would have been. You wonder who wore it. You wonder if they felt anything before it went dark. The armourer's apprentice, a girl no older than 13, shows you how to bundle arrowheads for the Fletchers. She works faster than you, eyes sharp, hands steady. She's missing the tip of her left pinky. You don't ask how, she talks more than the armourer does. We make 500 a week, more when there's word of trouble. Last siege, we made 700. Didn't matter. They still climbed the wall. You ask what happened. She shrugs. They ran out of arrows, started throwing rocks. It's not a joke. By late afternoon, you can't tell what hurts more, your arms, your back, or your lungs. You've inhaled enough smoke to season a stew, and your skin feels coated in an invisible film of grease and soot. But the bellows still need pumping, and the fire still needs feeding. You pause to drink water from a chipped mug, your hands black with grime. You look down at them and realise they don't quite feel like yours anymore. They're something else now. Tools, just like the tongs, just like the hammers. You think of all the swords this forger's made, the ones that pierced bodies, the ones that bent in armour, the ones still hanging on corpses beyond the gate, and how no one ever sings about the man, or girl, who made them. There's a scholarly debate about how standardised medieval weapons were. Some argue that blacksmiths worked from shared designs, templates passed down through generations. Others say much was improvised, forged from memory and need. Either way, each weapon had its quirks, and sometimes those quirks got people killed. As the sun lowers, the armourer finally waves you off. Done for today. You didn't die. Good work. You walk back across the courtyard feeling older than you did this morning. Your arms hang like dead ropes. Your face is streaked with ash. No one gives you a second look. In the barracks, someone asks what the forge is like. You don't answer. Not because you don't have words, just because none of them quite fit. That night you dream of sparks. Not fire, not blood, just sparks. Tiny explosions lighting the dark, gone in seconds. And in the silence after they vanish, the hammer keeps falling. The first thing you notice is the smell. You've smelled death before, on the battlefield drills, in the dungeons during the plague days, but this is different. This is old death. Sun-baked, rat-chewed, left outside too long death. You cover your nose with your sleeve, but it doesn't help. It's in the air now, seeping into your clothes, your skin, your thoughts. The siege ended 2 days ago. You'd barely realised it was over. One day there were war horns and catapults and flaming arrows. The next, silence. No cheers, no drums, just a kind of exhausted stillness that made you feel like you'd somehow stepped outside time. The enemy left, or died. It's not clear which. The castle stands, for now, and now you're on clean-up duty. The captain said it like he was doing you a favour. You didn't die. You get to clean up. You wanted to ask for latrine duty instead. Anything but this. You're assigned to the outer yard where the worst of it happened. The breach was shallow, but enough bodies got in to make things personal. Arrows still stick from the wall like angry bristles. Shattered shields lie half buried in churned mud. There's blood everywhere. Streaks, puddles, handprints smeared across the stones. It's dried now, brown and crusted, but it still makes your stomach turn. You and a few others have carts, buckets, and long-handled hooks. Your job is to clear the corpses, load them onto the carts, wheel them to the far edge of the lower field where the pits are being dug. There are so many. You lift a body. It's light. Too light. Probably a boy. His armour, what little he had, is cobbled together from mismatched leather and dented mail. You wonder if he even knew why he was fighting. You wonder if he had a choice. You put him on the cart, one down, 100 to go. Here's your historical fact. The aftermath of a medieval siege was often more deadly than the battle itself. Disease spread fast among the wounded and the living. Corpses piled up and rotted in the sun. Cleanup wasn't organised or swift, it was desperate and brutal. In some cases, entire castle staff died after the siege from infections caused by improper burial. Your quirky fact? There are records of defeated armies being forced to clean up their own dead before being ransomed. In one infamous case, prisoners were chained and made to dig pits for their fallen comrades, only to be buried alive when the trench was full. Mercy, the chronicler wrote, was not fashionable that year. Back in the yard, someone screams. It's not a battle cry, it's surprise. One of the younger lads had rolled over a body and found it still warm. Barely. The man coughs blood. His eyes flutter open. He grabs the boy's wrist with a strength that doesn't make sense. They call for the healer, but it's too late. By the time she gets there, the man's gone limp again, and now the boy won't stop shaking. You get numb to it after a while. The bodies blur. Some are whole, others aren't. You try not to look too close. One corpse is missing a head, another is face down in the mud, sword still clutched in a death grip. You don't try to pry it free. Let him keep it, you think. Let him take something. The rats are bold. They scurry across the yard in broad daylight, feasting. You kick them away, but they just return. The crows are worse, loud, fearless, perched on the bodies like judges. One flaps into your face as you approach a corpse, nearly taking your eye out. The lad next to you mutters, "They say the crows remember faces. Think they remember who gave them the best meat." You don't answer. You just keep hauling. The pits at the edge of the field are wide, shallow, and stinking, and you're not allowed to throw the bodies in. Too disrespectful, they say, so you lower them, one by one. As if that makes a difference now. The sun climbs higher, the air thickens. You can't tell what's sweat and what's blood anymore. Someone vomits, someone else faints. You just keep working. There's a scholarly debate about how much care medieval armies gave to burying the dead. Some argue it was minimal, dig a pit, move on. Others believe that, particularly in castles, there was an attempt at honour, separating friends from foes, marking graves when possible. But the truth seems to lie in desperation. When there are too many bodies, dignity gets rationed like everything else. By mid-afternoon your arms are shaking, your throat feels raw, your boots squelch with every step. You're told to switch to scrubbing the walls, removing blood with brine and lye and stiff brushes. The stone has absorbed it in places. It won't come clean. You scrape until your knuckles split and the red smears turn grey, and still it's there. At one point you lean your head against the wall and close your eyes, just for a second. You hear footsteps behind you and tense, but it's only the cook handing you a hunk of bread and a flask of weak wine. "Eat," she says. "Won't help, but do it anyway." You eat. It doesn't help. At dusk, the bell tolls again. Not for the dead, but for the end of the day. You're dismissed. Told to rest. Kuspitsus. You walk past the filled pit. It's been hastily covered with dirt. The smell still lingers. No markers, no names. Just silence. You crawl into your bedroll and lie still. You don't wash, you don't speak. You think about the boy in the mismatched armour, the headless one, the crows, and for the first time you realise something you hadn't fully grasped until now. The battle is the story they tell, but the aftermath, that's the part they leave out. Because no one wants to remember what happens when the swords go quiet. The castle is quiet now, not peaceful, quiet. There's a difference. Peace feels like something won, something earned. This quiet feels like a breath held too long, a hush before something you don't want to name. It's the kind of silence that creeps into your bones and makes you double-check that you're still breathing. You wake early, before the bell, before the sunrise, and just lie there, listening. You don't even know what for. Maybe footsteps, maybe voices, maybe something worse. But all you hear is the wind outside and the soft shifting of the other men in the barracks, restless even in sleep. No one talks much anymore, since the clean-up, since the sickness, since the siege that ended and somehow didn't. The garrison still drills, but slower. Meals are quieter. Laughter's gone extinct. You're back on wall duty this morning, pacing the outer rampart. From up here you can see it all. The breach that's been poorly patched with timber and hope. The field still scarred with cratered dirt. The blackened remains of the siege engines abandoned just out of range. Farther off, The road vanishes into the woods like it never meant to come back. There's a story the older guards tell, half joking, half not, about how castles like this never really stop being haunted. Not by ghosts, but by people, by memories. You don't need chains rattling in the night when you've got empty hallways and dried blood under the floorboards. And yet, as the sun begins to rise over the eastern hills, painting the sky in dull, reluctant light, you feel something like awareness. Like the castle itself is watching you. Not in a malicious way, not even angry, just present. You turn your head, there's no one there. Here's your historical fact. Superstition and religion were deeply embedded in castle life. Every stone had meaning, every chapel had a relic, and every death had to be explained, if not by God, then by ghosts. Castles were seen as spiritual battlegrounds as much as military ones. People believed in saints and spirits with equal conviction. Your quirky fact? In one well-documented case, an entire garrison refused to sleep in the west tower of a Scottish keep because they were convinced the ghost of a former lord, executed for treason, walked the halls at night. The solution? They walled it up. Not the ghost, the tower. Just bricked the whole thing shut like they were trying to erase a paragraph they couldn't read anymore. After breakfast, if you can call it that, half a biscuit and a smear of questionable lard, you're summoned to the chapel. The priest wants volunteers for a purification rite. You're not especially holy, but you've seen enough horror recently that even a sprinkle of blessed water and a muttered prayer sounds worth your time. Inside, the chapel smells of wax and mildew. The candlelight flickers along the stone walls, where faded murals show long-dead saints staring down in judgment. Or pity. You kneel at the edge and wait while the priest chants over a bowl of ash. He's old, tired. His voice is thin but steady. He says the castle needs cleansing. He says the walls have absorbed too much. He says some people will not leave, even after death. No one argues. After the ritual, he hands each of you a bundle of herbs tied in cloth. Hang it by your bed, he says. And if you hear footsteps when you're alone, don't answer them. That evening, someone starts talking about the ghosts. Again. Different voice this time. A new recruit who swears he heard breathing behind him on the parapet. Loud breathing, but no one was there. He laughs when he says it, but it doesn't sound real. Another guard mentions seeing lights flickering in the old barracks wing, shuttered since the siege. Someone else says they saw a shape at the top of the stairs that vanished when they blinked. You don't say anything, but you've felt it too. That creeping sense that someone's behind you. That shadow that lingers just a little too long. That corner of the room you avoid for no logical reason. Here's the scholarly debate. Were these so-called hauntings psychological stress responses, or genuine cultural beliefs in the supernatural? Some historians say people in castles were just overworked, sleep-deprived and traumatized. Others argue that belief itself was the reality, that fear, when shared, shaped the world around them. A ghost, in medieval thought, didn't need to exist physically. It just had to be believed in. Later that night, you sit alone in the tower. It's your shift. You light a small candle and stare at the flame. It flickers hard, despite there being no wind. You look out over the battlements, and there it is, a figure. At first, you think it's a guard, but it doesn't move like one. It stands too still. Its cloak doesn't flap in the breeze. You blink. It's gone. You don't report it. You don't even mention it to the man who replaces you at dawn. Instead, you go back to your bed, tie the priest's herbs to the post and lie back with your eyes wide open, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. You think about all the dead. You think about all the dying this place has seen, and you wonder, not if the castle is haunted, but how it could not be. Because you've walked its halls, bled on its stones, watched lives begin and end within its walls. And now you feel it watching you back, not cruelly and not kindly, just endlessly. Because in the end, it's not the fire or the plague or the arrows that make castles death traps. It's that they remember, and they don't let go. You wake up the next morning, and for the first time in what feels like months, the castle isn't angry with you. It's not warm exactly or kind, but it's calm. No screaming from the walls, no fire in the east wing, no plague carts rattling across the yard or enemy banners on the hill. The crows are still here, of course, they always are, but even they seem quieter today, as if the whole place has finally exhaled. You sit on the steps just outside the chapel. The sky is wide and pale, one of those soft blue mornings that makes the cold easier to live with. A guard nods at you in passing. Another offers you half a boiled egg. You eat it with your fingers, your nails still crusted with soot from forge duty 2 days ago. It tastes like nothing. You eat it anyway. For a long time no one speaks. The castle isn't a monster this morning, it's just a building. Stone and timber. Cold, sure, but not cruel. And maybe it was never cruel. Maybe it's just a reflection. A shell that turns into whatever people inside it are becoming. When fear walks in, the castle echoes it. When rage builds, the walls hold it like breath. And when death comes knocking, the castle doesn't stop it. It just holds the bodies until someone remembers to bury them. You've seen what happens here. You've been marched up murder stairs, slipped in plague muck, blacked out from fire smoke, climbed ladders into arrow storms, and dragged limbs that used to be men into ditches that don't get graves. And somehow you're still here, breathing, hurting, wiser in the worst way. You think back to when you first arrived, nervous, maybe even a little excited, still calling it an adventure. You had no idea. No idea that the real danger wasn't the enemy. It was the design. The trap laid in every corridor, built into every defensive feature, waiting patiently for your foot to slip or your torch to fall, or your stomach to turn on a winter night with bad stew. Castles weren't just fortresses. They were machines. Machines for surviving and failing with equal efficiency. They didn't just repel invaders. They turned on their own. Collapsing floors, falling gates, food stores that ran out, moats that froze and broke, diseases that hid in the rushes underfoot and the rafters overhead. They made people desperate. Then they made them dead. But even knowing all that, you think, would you do it again? And the honest answer? Maybe. Because you also saw firelight on the walls and lived. You heard the lady of the castle speak like a general while others whimpered. You watched a boy light a torch with shaking hands and still go first up the wall. You saw the forge apprentice turn scrap into weapons and the old cook hand out bread when her own belly was empty. The castle is a death trap, absolutely. But inside it, people keep surviving. You stand up, stretch your back and turn toward the gates. They're cracked open today just a little. Like the castle's giving you permission. And maybe it is.